Hello, and thank you for choosing this clean, historical Western romance by Emma Ashwood. Before we begin, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Your support allows us to keep sharing more wonderful stories for free. So grab a cozy spot, kick back, and let this story whisk you away to a different time and place. Enjoy. Copyright Emma Ashwood. Always and Forever by Emma Ashwood. Chapter 1. Jennifer Goodman was having a restless night's sleep. Unseasonably warm for fall, she awoke for what seemed the umpteenth time. She was thirsty. The slight woman eased herself quietly out of bed so as not to disturb her husband, although waking him was unlikely. Mark Goodman was blessed with an easygoing temperament and a clean conscience. Most nights, the hard-working merchant barely had his head touch the pillow before he fell fast asleep. Jennifer joked that the only thing that could rouse him was the smell of bacon cooking for breakfast. Truly. Jennifer lifted the pitcher on the nightstand and poured herself a glass of water. After several refreshing sips, she set the glass down gratefully. She plumped her pillow in the hope it might cast magic for her to drift off to sleep. Lying down again, she heard gentle snores coming from her husband. Mark was fast asleep, that was for sure. He hadn't budged when she climbed back into bed. The pretty woman smiled as she thought of the day ahead. They were having an afternoon picnic with friends from out of town. They would travel the Hudson River on a steamship. Fancy that. Mark had suggested a Sunday picnic as the weather promised to be fine. Her ever-practical husband reasoned it to be a perfect way to relax. Besides, it was less fuss after a busy week. Jennifer closed her eyes, willing sleep to take over. Tired but peaceful, she consoled herself with the reminder that they'd be attending the later morning church service. They could enjoy a relaxing start to the morning, which would be a rare treat. Lizzy was likely to seek their attention first thing, with the latest outfit her doll was wearing. The 6-year-old was unusually attentive to fine detail for her age. Lizzy could be quite unbudging if coaxed to wear clothes she didn't like. She had even restyled a jacket, all of her own doing. When Jennifer found her cutting the plaid buttons off of a blue jacket, she didn't know whether to be mad or impressed. "Lizzy, please check with me first next time, you hear?" Jennifer had asked, rather than scolded. She'd turned away to hide her urge to burst into laughter at her daughter's impish delight in her creation. Perhaps she'd be a seamstress one day. Casting aside her thoughts, Jennifer's eyes opened wide in alarm. The sound was unmistakably the latch on the front door being eased back. She froze her senses on high alert. Perhaps she was mistaken. The floorboards creaked on the landing. Jennifer's heart beat furiously as panic set in. She pressed her mouth against Mark's ear. "Mark, wake up! There's someone in the house!" He grunted a response, his eyes still closed as he snuggled up to her. "Mark, I heard someone in the house," she whispered urgently, loud enough to startle him into action. She clambered out of bed. Mark sat up, alert to her fear, as he figured out what to do. "Are you sure?" he whispered. Jennifer nodded vehemently. Her first instinct was to lock the door, but "Get Lizzy," she told him, her eyes wild as the gravity of the situation dawned on her. Shocked but calm, Mark gently pressed his index finger to his mouth, and then hers. Her brave husband tiptoed swiftly in the direction of Lizzy's bedroom, which was right next to theirs. Jennifer stood, barely breathing, against the doorway. She drew back quickly as she glimpsed a man shuffling through papers in the writing bureau in the parlor. "Please let us be safe," Jennifer prayed. Mark swept their sleeping daughter into his arms. She awoke bewildered. "Lizzy, don't ask questions. After I get you safely outside, run to Uncle Tony's house to get help." Lizzy stuck out her chin defiantly as she absorbed the information. With Lizzy in his arms, her father barreled past the angry man in the woolly hat who yelled insults after them. With seconds to spare, her father set her down outside. "Go, Lizzy," he ordered. "Remember that we love you." Lizzy ran as fast as her legs would take her over the uneven pathway towards Uncle Tony's inn. Her father tackled one of the men in an attempt to deter him from following her. She heard something crash to the ground as her mother threw a pitcher at the man in the woolly hat. Lizzy decided to concentrate on running. The brave, determined little girl ran so fast that she wondered if an angel was helping her. The ground was cold and damp under her bare feet. Although her chest heaved with exertion, she did not stop even once. While her uncle's inn was a short distance away, the darkness didn't help matters. Her route even took her past an alleyway or two, which were to be feared. Her father always reminded her to stay clear of alleyways. "Hooligans lurk there," her father would warn. The closer Lizzy got to Uncle Tony's house, the more the full-blown panic set in. "Uncle Tony, help us!" Lizzy yelled, loud enough to wake any travelers overnighting in the inn. The inn door opened even as several faces peeked through the curtains of the rooms above to find the cause behind the commotion. Uncle Tony stood inside the entranceway, reluctant to go into the street in his nightgown. He held a lantern in one hand. Not minding his attire, Lizzy hurled herself into her uncle's arms as she revealed the reason for her panic, albeit in fits and starts. Stocky in stature, Uncle Tony had a kind heart beneath his gruff exterior. "Lizzy, stay put here with your Auntie Ellen while I get help," Uncle Tony said sternly with compassion in his eyes. "Yes, Uncle Tony," Lizzy replied solemnly as Auntie Ellen drew her protectively into her arms. "Here, Lizzy, let's sit in the kitchen. I'll warm us some milk. Would you like that?" Lizzy nodded, partly hopeful and partly fearful of what was to come of her and her parents. A blacksmith who had lodgings at the inn offered to accompany Tony to the police station for assistance. They made for the shed and the bicycles within. As her burly uncle and his friends set off on their bicycles, Lizzy wondered if her parents had managed to chase the intruders off. She didn't dare to think about it. Lizzy focused on their would-be rescuers as they pedaled off as best they could. Lizzy did allow herself a little giggle as she witnessed her uncle's large girth in his nightgown cycling off, his bald head gleaming in the moonlight like a beacon of hope. In the rush of attending to his sister and brother-in-law's welfare, he had quite forgotten all etiquette. Lizzy imagined that the police would be as startled at his disheveled appearance as he was when she had appeared at the inn. "Best you come in now," Aunt Ellen commented quietly from behind her. "They'll be a long time coming back. These things take a while." It was then that Lizzy released her pent-up anxiety. She sobbed into her aunt's apron. "What if they don't get there in time?" she asked. Her aunt couldn't think of a suitable answer, so she merely patted Lizzy's back soothingly until her sobbing eased. Morning dawned brightly despite being cooler than the day before. Lizzy told herself she would see her parents soon. She would. Her father was smart and strong, and her mother would never give up without a struggle. Lizzy knew that, having seen her mother rescue a cat stuck in a tree, against all wisdom to the contrary. At first, her father had been as mad as a snake while her mother regaled the encounter. Jennifer embellished the story for Lizzy's entertainment, and her father doubled up with laughter. "You are some woman, to be sure," he told his wife, love shining in his eyes. "They were a family and families stuck together, right?" Lizzy reminded herself. She touched the sole of her foot gingerly, feeling out the spot from standing on a sharp object the night before. It was her good fortune that it hadn't bled. "Lizzy, please take the washing off the line for me," Aunt Ellen asked. "There's a basket in the scullery to put the linen in. You can keep the pegs on the line." Aunt Ellen looked worried. Maybe she was just tired from the events of the previous night, Lizzy mused. An obedient child, she got to the task immediately. Lizzy was grateful for something to do, instead of just sitting around waiting. Waiting for what, she wondered, as she watched a sparrow land in the courtyard to peck away at a crumb as if its life depended on it. After she had finished folding the linen, Lizzy decided she'd rather be outdoors. It would be happier with the birds chirping their morning chorus. People were walking to the market, and some were heading for the river to fish. This would be their last opportunity to fish before the really cold weather set in and the river froze over. Just as Lizzy set the final pillowcase on top of the pile of folded linen, she heard her aunt's cry of dismay. "Oh no," Aunt Ellen wailed from the parlor. The firm control of her emotions for Lizzy's sake gave way to grief as she heard the news of her sister's passing. Lizzy stood in place wondering if this was all just a horrible dream and hoping to wake up soon. She walked slowly towards the parlor. Perhaps it wasn't as bad as it seemed. Lizzy convinced herself at the moment that her parents were hurt, in hospital, wounded, but alive, and asking for her. They'd be fine. They had to be. "There you are, Lizzy," her uncle acknowledged quietly when she entered the parlor. Two police officers were with her aunt and uncle. Uncle Tony had his arm protectively around his wife's shoulders as they sat on the sofa together. The police officers held their caps in hand, the younger of the two twirling his cap nervously. Their downcast expression confirmed the news Lizzy had feared to hear even before she got the details. "I will take it from here," her uncle told the police officers, who were clearly relieved as well as sympathetic. "Thank you, sir," they chorused in unison. Lizzy reckoned that the police officers were a lot younger than her father, despite being grown-ups. In a flash of insight uncommon in one so young, she recognized that the situation made them nervous, although they were trying their best not to show it. She sympathized with them. "Please contact the police station should you require further assistance in handling this matter," the more confident officer offered. "Thank you, officer," Aunt Ellen said, exchanging a glance with Uncle Tony. "I will see you out, gentlemen," Tony said, thankful for a reason to leave the room, if only for a while. Lizzy stared at her aunt as if seeing her for the first time, feeling her family ebbing away. "Come here, dear," Aunt Ellen said. Lizzy sat down heavily on the sofa as if a burden had been added to her young shoulders. Her aunt took her hands in her calloused ones. "There is no easy way to say this, dearest child," Aunt Ellen explained. "Your parents passed away last night. They are with their Father in heaven." Lizzy sat still as a church mouse. Then, as tears welled up in her eyes, making the room look misty, she asked, "What's to become of me?" "You are to live with your half-sister Mary and her husband, George Micklethwaite, and their children, Martin and Katie. We have telegraphed them. They are sending a horse and cart in the morning. We'd have you, dear, but an inn is no place in which to raise a child." Chapter 2. "Have you finished polishing the door knocker yet, Lizzy?" Mary Micklethwaite asked the 20-year-old Lizzy Goodman as she stepped into the entrance hall. Mary wore her familiar disapproving look, Lizzy noted. She paused before answering, as much to gather her thoughts as to prolong the lingering annoyance she saw reflected in her half-sister's eyes. "Yes, ma'am," Lizzy responded quietly, stifling the urge to bob a curtsy. "Good. Then you can get started on brushing down the brickwork around the front step," Mary commanded imperiously. She whisked the sleeping cat off her lap in a sweeping motion, as if it were a fly rather than her pet. "There's time enough before our guests arrive. We must keep up the appearance of respectability." "Would it be acceptable for me to break for a cup of tea before I do that?" "It's warm out today," Lizzy explained. Her forehead was damp with sweat, and her work dress felt sticky on her back. Mary nodded absent-mindedly, as if her attention was miles away. The dainty, industrious young Lizzy had paused to catch her breath in the stifling heat, and when she took to her feet again to resume her laborious task, she discovered with horror that she had sat on the polish rag. Mary wouldn't take kindly to a skirt stained with polish, threadbare as it may be. To exacerbate matters further, tendrils of her silky blonde hair had escaped the confines of her cap. Lizzy walked briskly towards the kitchen before her guardian of the past 14 years could change her mind. "Mary," bellowed the rasping voice belonging to George Micklethwaite from what seemed the bowels of the house. This was followed by a fit of wheezing and coughing, which thankfully kept him quiet for a while thereafter. Ashamed by her uncharitable thought, Lizzy returned to her half-sister in the parlor. She decided to keep her company while she waited for the water to boil on the cooker. George was a lot to contend with, what with his gambling and drinking habits. Lizzy was startled to see Mary stretched out on the settee with her eyes closed and both feet at rest on the armrests. A hand shielded her face as if it were a fan in an attempt to stop the sunlight filtering through. Lizzy sat down in the armchair. Mary hadn't yet responded to her husband's plaintive call. She seemed loath to. "Is he all right?" Lizzy asked after a demure cough to announce her presence. "Who be he? The cat's father?" Mary retorted indignantly. Lizzy took note that the nap had done nothing to relax her, which was a pity. Mary sat up stiffly, albeit reluctantly. "When are we to get any peace around here?" Mary reflected with a heavy sigh. "Yes, George, what is it?" She caterwauled with such a shift in tone and volume that Lizzy jumped in her seat. George, Mary repeated, her hands held at the sides of her mouth like a loud hailer. Lizzy would have found their exchange quite comical if she wasn't obliged to board and lodge with them. But to witness this interaction night and day took its toll, although she had giggled on occasion at the ridiculous facade Mary insisted on maintaining. All the pretense and social nuances that formed the fabric of respectable society. Visiting at a certain hour and accepting invitations after careful consideration of their social merit. Being seen with influential people could enable our entry into high society, Mary had explained dourly when Lizzy had once asked why Mary didn't just call on friends when she felt like it. Nonetheless, Lizzy was in an uncommonly energetic mood, especially considering she had just spent the better part of an hour polishing the door knocker to perfection. The sheen on their door knocker must surely be unrivaled in the district, she reckoned. Her knuckles were proof of that. Stained a treacle hue from her exertions, where she dabbed the polish onto the rag a good many times. Her tiny, calloused hands were at risk of bleeding with this. She turned her attention to Mary, who had woken up to the fact that her tippling husband hadn't yet responded to her inquiry about his well-being. Mary walked off determinedly in the direction of the study where George was likely to be asleep, going by the snores reverberating down the passage. Lizzy was aware that he had already finished off the brandy she had decanted for him that morning. He'd swallowed a tumbler full immediately after breakfast and consumed the rest steadily throughout the morning, saying it eased his rheumatism. "George is in a bad way," Mary announced dolefully to the world at large when she returned to join Lizzy in the parlor. "He brought up his breakfast this morning, the whole lot. He's certainly in no fit state to have tea," Mary added with a shudder. Lizzy understood that to indicate that the discussion was closed. Lizzy also feared for George's health, as much for her own well-being as his. Her brother-in-law showed her the occasional kindness, and Lizzy would prefer to keep him around a while longer if she could help it, troublesome though he was. "Perhaps if I make George jam squares, that will cheer him up?" Lizzy suggested to induce better behavior from the man. "Yes, that would be grand," Mary conceded graciously. Lizzy almost fainted on the spot. This meant her half-sister had released her from cleaning duty. Even if her roster remained full, pastry-making was preferable to polishing and dusting. Without a doubt, the day was proving to be relatively fine, Lizzy decided. "I'll make the jam squares now then, ma'am." Lizzy double-checked to be sure she had the royal nod. Mary looked at Lizzy appraisingly, as if weighing the options in her mind. "Yes, do that, dear," Mary approved. In all the years that Lizzy had lodged with Mary, she only recalled one occasion other than this that she had been referred to as dear. A year after she took up lodging with them, on Lizzy's 7th birthday in August, Uncle Tony and Aunt Ellen had turned up mid-morning with a strawberry flan and a jug of cream to go with it. They were beaming from ear to ear. Her niece, Katie, then only 5 years old, had caught the festive mood and leaned over to touch the cake. Lizzy's brattish cousin, Martin, was only 1 year old and asleep in his cot. All these years later, Lizzy reflected that Mary's children couldn't help the fact that they were spoiled rotten. Lizzy remembered her 7th birthday fondly. Mary had made her a birthday card inscribed simply with "Happy Birthday, Lizzy, Love Mary and George, Katie and Martin." Katie had drawn a yellow daisy on the front. Lizzy still had the card tucked in her Bible. George had declared on behalf of all present, "Oh good, let's eat cake." George's talent for stating the obvious had made everyone laugh. As the family gathered around the table, Lizzy at the center, she had felt a sense of belonging for the first time in many months. There had been a happy, relaxed atmosphere as if none present had a care in the world. "It is your special day, dear," Mary said. Lizzy's guardian had knelt down eye level and given her a brief hug. Mary had seemed as moved by Uncle Tony and Aunt Ellen showing up bearing a cake as Lizzy was. Mary was 18 years older than Lizzy, which according to Lizzy's calculations made Mary 25 at the time. George was 6 years older than his wife, who must have been 31. Mary and George would now be 38 and 44 respectively. They were seemingly of a different generation to Lizzy, evident more by the manner in which they treated her than the actual age gap. When Lizzy turned 10 and Martin was just 4, Lizzy was moved to the basement, separated from the family. Martin relocated to Lizzy's former bedroom. Mary told her that Martin, as the future heir, should have his own bedroom rather than share with Katie. "We all have our station in life," Mary said curtly. "Get used to it. We have taken you in as a gesture of great charity. You should be expected to thank us for our hospitality." Lizzy nodded, hurt and angry. In that moment, an employer-servant relationship was firmly established, and Lizzy decided never to display her true feelings towards Mary again, unless hard-pressed. Lizzy wouldn't give her that satisfaction. Mary and Lizzy shared the same father, Mark Goodman. Mary's mother, Martha, was Mark's first wife, and she had passed away when Mary was just 12, following a bad bout of influenza during a very cold winter. She had still been pining for her mother when Mark married Jennifer a few years later. As a teenager, Mary had resented his new wife. By default, she also resented her half-sister Lizzy when she was later born into the scene. Mary saw her sibling as a disturbance to their already fragile family unit. Back to the present, Lizzy told herself, no point dwelling on the past. Lizzy enjoyed making pastries, having discovered her knack for baking at an early age. Lizzy had baked a small pastry tart that had turned out exquisitely golden and puffy, going by the same recipes as Mary, whose creation had been simply satisfactory. George had heralded Lizzy's as simply splendid. "What's your secret?" Mary asked, baffled and not displeased. Lizzy's talent could serve them well, in terms of securing a housekeeping position with a wealthy family one day. They needed to look to their future, not just Lizzy's. "Love is the secret," George declared as a matter of fact, shortly after making his presence known in the kitchen by his tuneless whistle. "Don't I take good care of you, then?" Mary demanded, but she didn't seem cross. "You are indeed attentive," her husband replied mildly. He smiled at Lizzy, humor showing in his eyes. Fortunately for him, he was a distance from Mary, preventing her from knocking his hat from his head, but rendering it askew, nonetheless. Chapter 3. All these years later, 20-year-old Lizzy considered that she had no particular reason for being in such a joyful frame of mind. She considered her reflection in the scullery mirror, without vanity, while she washed her hands. Her closest friend Gloria had told her how blessed she was to have the silky golden hair found only in fairy tales. "Perhaps you'll meet your handsome prince one day," Gloria added, which had made Lizzy laugh. Staring at her face in the mirror, Lizzy conceded that her eyes were bright and quite a nice shade of blue. She thought dark eyes more exotic. Lizzy shook her head at her fanciful imaginings and wiped her hands on her apron. She was looking forward to a rare Saturday off. The family was traveling out of town without Lizzy. "We need to get our house in order," Mary had said firmly over breakfast the week before. "Make sure our financial affairs are sound and the family is well provided for." Lizzy almost choked on her tea in an attempt to curb the giggle that was bubbling under the surface. Only the week before, George had spent the week's housekeeping allowance on a bet. Usually his wins outlasted his losing streaks. His gambling had kept the family adequately provided for, as long as Mary hid spare cash for the lean times. George was uncannily talented at cards. But now, George's gambling prowess seemed to have taken a turn for the worse. As he continued to lose and amass a debt, the family's source of income dried up. Lizzy often heard Mary and George argue into the early hours of the morning. In a bid to escape his problems, George took to drinking heavily. His drinking sprees were becoming more frequent and prolonged. "You stay healthy, girl," Mary scolded. "Begging your pardon, ma'am," Lizzy replied. "It's just that the tea is still warm." Mary seemed unconvinced, and Lizzy added a generous helping of milk to her tea. "Ah, much better," she declared. George chuckled. He adopted a serious face as he noticed his wife glare at him. For all the trouble he brought on the family, George was sometimes the only cheer in Lizzy's day. He would offer her a peppermint or toffee when he'd won a game, and had once gone so far as to buy her a hat, much to his wife's dismay. On Saturday, Lizzy was going to the dress shops with Gloria on the pretext of being a lady of means. She might even fit a dress. When Gloria had suggested the outing, Lizzy had shared her fear that the sales assistants would be averse to allowing her to fit an outfit. Her dresses were mostly hand-me-downs, and they'd assume she couldn't afford their prices. Some New York shop assistants were snobbish and seemed to want to put themselves at a distance from people of their own rank, now that they were mixing with the well-heeled. Lizzy thought their attitude quite peculiar. She could never shun people in that way. Imagine turning a blind eye whenever an acquaintance or neighbor walked in, Lizzy pondered. No, she decided. It was plain rude. Lizzie's skepticism had caused Gloria to be all the more determined that they try on several dresses. Gloria opened her wardrobe with a flourish. "Here, you can wear this dress on Saturday," she announced. Gloria held the prettiest day dress Lizzy could ever remember laying eyes on, and Lizzy gasped with delight. The dress was a pale blue gingham with a high collar and wide, flouncy sleeves. The style and color were exactly what she would have chosen if she had a purse of her own. Grateful to her kind-hearted friend, they agreed that it made more sense for Lizzy to change into the dress while at Gloria's house. If Mary saw the dress hanging in her wardrobe, she'd know something was up. Only 3 days, Lizzy told herself, and then they'd have some fun. Chapter 4. George and Mary planned to leave early with 18-year-old Katie and 14-year-old Martin in tow. Martin usually behaved better when his older sister was around. On this particular morning, his sister was nowhere to be seen. Perhaps Martin sensed that Lizzy was anxious to see the back of him, keen as she was to spend the morning with her friend, and he was being unusually precocious. Weren't all teenagers, Lizzy reminded herself. The thought occurred to her that Martin may have turned out more pleasant if only his parents hadn't given in to his whims. Unusually tall for his age, he was smart and good-looking. Fed a constant stream of compliments from an early age, Martin reached the conclusion that the world revolved around him. This morning, Lizzy eventually coaxed him to gather his clothes under her supervision. She was just congratulating herself on Martin's obedience when he told her, "If you smiled more, perhaps I'd listen better." Lizzy paused in her endeavor to help him pack his clothes into an overnight bag and counted to 10 in her mind. With her anger showing no signs of abating, she continued to count to 20 for good measure. Lizzy reflected that she should probably have continued counting to a much higher number, seen as Martin had taken to grinning at his own impudence. "Martin," she scolded, and he had the good grace to look alarmed, given that she had never spoken to him like that. Never. "Gotcha," she replied. "I was going to pack toffees for the trip from your father, but I'm having second thoughts." She watched his face as he struggled to get the words out. He knew what to say, he just didn't like admitting he was wrong. "Yes?" Lizzy asked. She felt a smile curling around the corners of her mouth, and she couldn't help it. Young Martin stood quietly, as stubborn as a mule. Martin's stubbornness was a family trait they shared, courtesy of his grandfather, Mark Goodman. His success as a merchant was as much based on his ability to stand his ground as on his sharp intellect. "Sorry, I was horrible just now," Martin mumbled sheepishly. "Apology accepted, thank you," Lizzy conceded. "You are pretty even when you don't smile," Martin added as he packed a book in his bag. Lizzy smiled at him, astonished. "It's so quiet in here. I thought the boy was asleep." George interrupted when he entered the room with a debonair swagger. The lean man was freshly shaven and smartly dressed in beige trousers, a navy jacket, and a bowler hat. He looked more like the Uncle Lizzy remembered as a young girl. Lately, George had taken to rising later, and his grooming habits had become less than satisfactory. Mary had put her foot down the day before. Martin looked at his father with approval. "You look smart, father," Martin said. "You should dress like that more often." "He's quite the charmer this morning," Lizzy said of Martin. "I do my best," George said with a wink. They laughed at his joke. "Are we ready?" Mary asked as she appeared in the doorway. She stopped as she noted her husband's appearance. "Is that really you, George? You look 10 years younger." "I try," George said dryly, removing his hat with a flourish. "Keep the hat on, rather," Mary suggested. Despite her crisp tone, she looked pleased and almost proud of her husband. Mary had also taken extra care with her appearance. Dressed in a mint green dress with a pale yellow cardigan, she looked feminine rather than formidable. She usually wore dull browns and grays, seeing them as practical. "Shall we, madam?" George asked, as he took his wife's hand to lead the family down the passage. "100%." Katie appeared from inside her bedroom, dragging a bag behind her that was twice the size of her brother's. Lizzy wondered if she had packed her entire wardrobe in there. Maybe she wanted to be sure she packed appropriately, since the weather could be unpredictable at this time of year. "Katie is meeting up with an old acquaintance," Mary explained when she saw Lizzy's surprised expression. "Please take Katie's bag to the carriage, Lizzy. George cannot manage everything himself." Katie dropped her bag without a word and walked on ahead without a backward glance. Lizzy, accustomed as she was to Katie's airs and graces, ignored the rude behavior. "Katie, say thank you," Martin instructed his sister, surprising Lizzy for the second time that morning. Katie turned, her eyes haughty as they met Lizzy's. "Thank you," she smirked. Lizzy reminded herself that one day Katie would have her comeuppance. George had not heard the exchange, busy as he was maneuvering his wife's luggage and his own into the horse-drawn carriage. Lizzy handed Martin a cowboy-style hat as he climbed up back after giving his sister a foot up. They were heading west to Texas, and Lizzy could not resist buying the Stetson when she saw it a few days earlier. Martin was clearly thrilled with the gift. "Woo-ha!" he whooped, immediately putting it on at a jaunty slant. "Thank you, Lizzy." "Only a pleasure," she replied. Mary pursed her lips and George laughed while Katie pretended to be unimpressed. "Lizzy, we will be back before sundown on Tuesday," Mary reminded. "Please see that there is a warm dinner waiting and the table set. Mrs. Robertson will check on you every evening to make sure you are behaving and she will stay the night." Lizzy wondered what she could possibly get up to without money of her own and no beau. "Yes, ma'am, I shall do so. Should I make her dinner?" "Yes, indeed." "Good then," Mary said. She turned to her husband, anxious to get going. "Take care, Lizzy," George greeted, his eyes kind as he clicked the reins to move the horses on. "Don't miss me too much," Martin called. Lizzy smiled demurely. "Bye," she said with a parting wave to them all. Chapter 5. "My goodness, Lizzy, you look so glamorous, I scarcely recognize you," Gloria exclaimed. She looked at her friend, enthralled by the transformation. Lizzy was just as surprised at the reflection of the woman staring back at her in the full-length mirror. Could that image really be her? She looked confident and ever so stylish. "I love the dress, Gloria," she said shyly. Lizzy was overwhelmed by the heady sensation of appearing to be a lady. To hide her awkwardness, she joked, "I just need someone to serve me tea and scones and then I'll be thoroughly spoiled." "Not in my dress, you don't," Gloria said. Gloria smiled as Lizzy pretended to sulk. "What are you going to wear?" Lizzy asked. Gloria pulled a face. "You're a hard act to follow. Should I even bother to change?" Gloria asked. "Of course, silly," Lizzy said. She looked at Gloria as if seeing her through the eyes of a stylist. "With your dark hair, you should wear a deep blue or pink." "How about this?" Gloria asked, pulling a pink dress off its hanger. The style was looser than Lizzy's, with a longer hemline and big buttons. She looked radiant. "Yes, that's perfect," Lizzy responded. "What if someone sees me?" "Oh, they surely will see you, honey," Gloria replied. "No, what if someone sees me whom I know?" Lizzy clarified earnestly with a worried frown. Gloria thought her friend's innocence made her all the more beautiful, unlike those girls who were unashamedly vain. "I don't know," Gloria mused. "Greet them with a good morning. Ask how they're doing," she continued. "When they ask how you're doing, reply with 'I'm just dandy.'" "I would never say that," Lizzy said, horrified before she realized that Gloria was pulling her leg. They doubled over with hysterical laughter, girls again, rather than women. They sensed that their outing ushered in a new era. Their families would soon expect them to find their own way in the world, get married, and start a family of their own. Some of their friends were already speaking of an engagement, whereas neither Gloria nor Lizzy were so much as dating. Their families wouldn't allow it. Lizzy certainly wouldn't have wanted to be chaperoned by George or Mary, and she giggled at the prospect. Her friend looked at her, dumbfounded. "What is it?" Lizzy asked after she'd wiped away her tears of laughter. "Please keep that dress as a gift from me, Lizzy," Gloria requested. "I couldn't," Lizzy declined, looking at the dress wistfully. "Much as I appreciate the gesture, You're the sweetest friend. Why do you make it sound like I'm leaving town? I'm not planning on going anywhere. I overheard Mary speaking to a man last week outside the library, Gloria confided. Lizzie's hand flew to her mouth. You mean a secret admirer? She asked. It was Gloria's turn to chuckle. Do you think that's very likely? She asked. Perhaps not, Lizzie admitted. So what did this stranger look like, and why were you eavesdropping in the first place? I was bored, Gloria explained. I was meeting Joan to return a book I'd borrowed, and she was late. Mary and the man were sitting on a bench outside. Actually, he looked rather unsavory, truth be told, which is another reason I stuck around longer than I should have. I was intrigued. Gloria looked shamefaced. It's fine, Gloria. I would have done the same in your shoes, Lizzie soothed. Anyway, it isn't like you would go about town broadcasting a rendezvous. I know you are a loyal friend. Thanks, Lizzie. The next part gets really interesting, Gloria announced. Lizzie held her breath. Joan arrived. After she apologized for keeping me, she asked if I'd seen the man on the bench. When I said I had, Joan told me the strangest thing. Gloria hesitated. Perhaps I shouldn't be sharing this with you, Lizzie. Her voice trailed off. It may make you uncomfortable. You started the story. You can't stop now, Lizzie admonished, wondering where on earth this was heading. Okay, Gloria demurred. His name is Frank Evans. He arranges mail-order brides for men out west. Her expression was serious, and Gloria realized Lizzie hadn't understood the implication. But why would Mary arrange a marriage for Katie? Lizzie asked. She wouldn't want her to leave town, let alone allow it. Besides, Katie and Marvin are speaking of an engagement. Gloria was quiet. She looked at Lizzie intently. You are not serious, Lizzie said as the penny dropped. Sorry, Lizzie, I'm not mistaken, Gloria confided. I clearly heard your aunt say that Lizzie has the potential to attract a wealthy suitor. What about love? Would I get to meet him first? Do I have any say in this? Lizzie asked, her face pale. Gloria shrugged. That's all I know. I thought I had better tell you. Lizzie, I'm sure you will be able to say yay or nay to the marriage. I'd rather say never, Lizzie said glumly. Not never to marriage, but not this way. You never know. He could be dashing, kind, wealthy, and wise. Gloria said hopefully. Or none of the above, Lizzie retorted. Gloria continued. He could be the best thing that ever happened to you. I heard of a lady who ended up living in a country manor house with servants when she used to be a housekeeper. Imagine that. Let's go shopping, Lizzie suggested. I can't bear to think about it. Gloria wasn't prepared to let her friend off so lightly. You wouldn't want to live in a manor house? Gloria teased. I could visit. Just imagine the fun we'd have. Their faces brightened at the prospect. They linked arms and walked towards the nearest dress shop. Fun beckoned. Chapter 6. Lizzie decided to make a simple meal for the Micklethwaite's homecoming on Tuesday afternoon. Beef stew, including potatoes and turnips, pancakes and syrup for dessert, one of George's favorite meals. She wished that someone else would cook for a change. Lizzie was tired of her own recipes. She should have asked Mrs. Robertson to share hers. That would have passed the time better. The parson's wife had spent most of their shared meals listing her various ailments. This enthralling topic was peppered with the occasional reference to a psalm she thought fit to share for Lizzie's benefit. Lizzie had no objection to psalms, but the rest of the conversation left her searching for a reason to excuse herself. As Lizzie was a poor liar, she concentrated on her meal and nodded occasionally. You're a good listener, Mrs. Robertson remarked on Tuesday morning as she said goodbye. That virtue shall serve you well as a married woman. Lizzie smiled politely. She wondered whether Mrs. Robertson was in on the plan that Mary was hatching. Most probably. Maybe even the parson. Lizzie spent the early afternoon looking out the window awaiting their arrival, in between darning socks. That task complete, she put a hot press to Mary and Katie's dresses and her own. While they didn't have many dresses, Katie's were far grander and newer than Lizzie's. The family returned just before tea time. Lizzie heard the horses whinny as they drew up outside. She opened the door to assist with the luggage. Lizzie noticed Martin wasn't wearing his cowboy hat, but it had pride of place on the seat beside him. Katie was petulant, as usual. Good afternoon, Lizzie, George said as he fastened the horses to the hitching post. He looked rested and happy. "Good afternoon, George," Lizzy replied. She smiled at them all. Lizzy was content to have company. She had felt surprisingly lonely at times. Mrs. Robertson, while a companion, was a relative stranger. "Mrs. Robertson tells me you were a good girl," Mary reported. Lizzy hid her surprise. They must have communicated via telegraph. "Yes, ma'am," she replied. Why had Mrs. Robertson not mentioned they'd been in contact? Lizzy felt cross for no reason other than a rising unease about the future. "Tomorrow is another day," she reminded herself. "Lizzy, go ahead and draw our water," Katie instructed when her parents were out of earshot. "You are soon to leave us," she said condescendingly. "I shall wait for your mother to brief me," Lizzy said quietly. Her reply was the closest she came to telling Katie off for being obnoxious. And to think that Katie was 2 years younger than her. Katie acted like the lady of the house. Lizzy doubted whether she knew how to run a household other than to tell those of lower rank off. She laughed. "It's good to hear your laughter, Lizzy," George said, leaving his study with a tumbler of brandy. He looked crestfallen as his wife marched toward him. "George, we spoke about your drinking. Remember?" Mary scolded. He nodded. She held her hand out to him. "Give that to me," she demanded. "I could pour you a glass, my love," he said weakly. Mary shook her head. "That won't work on me, George." George slowly handed the glass over like a child caught with a hand in the cookie jar. Her uncle looked so forlorn that Lizzy felt sorry for him. She knew what it was to feel alone in the world. "George, if you don't mind, Mrs. Robertson shared a psalm that may ease your rheumatism," Lizzy suggested. Mary and George turned to look at her, astonished. They had never heard her quote scripture. Lizzy shared, "The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom will I fear? The Lord is the strength of my life. Of whom will I be afraid?" They were silent, and then George spoke. "You, dear girl," he said, "that was a thoughtful deed." His eyes were swimming with tears. "Thank you, Lizzy," Mary said. "I see Mrs. Robertson has left an impression. We shall join you for dinner presently." Chapter 7. Mary had been uncharacteristically relaxed of late, Lizzy thought. Her half-sister wasn't exactly kind, but she seemed altered. She couldn't quite put her finger on what was different about her. Lizzy still had to rise early, and she spent her days on household chores. She only got Sundays off, apart from having to prepare breakfast and dinner. But, Lizzy reflected, Mary seemed softer around the edges somehow. Mary even laughed occasionally. The atmosphere had improved, although Lizzy longed for the day when she could establish her own home. However, was that likely to happen, what with her cooped up all week long, at the Micklethwaite's beck and call? On the very day that Lizzy wondered how she could ever break free, Mary surprised her with an unexpected decision, delivered shortly after the family had finished their breakfast. George and the children had already gone their separate ways. Lizzy was clearing the last of the plates off the kitchen table. "Lizzy, when you're done carrying those, come sit with me a moment," Mary beckoned with a brief smile. She smoothed the folds of her new skirt. Mary actually looked quite striking in that maroon color, Lizzy observed. "Yes, Mary?" Lizzy asked as she sat down. Lizzy hoped she wasn't about to be scolded. She was feeling decidedly fragile as she hadn't slept well. "Thanks, Lizzy." George and I thought at length on this matter before we reached a conclusion. "This doesn't sound good," Lizzy thought wryly. She told herself to be calm. "Perhaps we should both have another cup of tea while we discuss this," Mary suggested. Lizzy was tempted to say she'd rather get it over with. As she was not inclined to speak so rashly, she held her tongue. "I shall put on the water in the meantime," Lizzy said dutifully. She rose and returned to the hearth. The embers were still glowing, fortunately. Lizzy stoked the coals, and as she watched the flames jump alive, she reminded herself that whatever Mary told her would just be her opinion. Lizzy could agree, but it wasn't likely to be earth-shattering, was it? Feeling calmer, she returned to her seat with a smile. "As I said, this decision has been made, Lizzy. There shall be no argument concerning our decision after I have told you our plans for your future." Lizzy waited attentively, wishing her half-sister would hurry up. Was Mary enjoying prolonging the suspense, Lizzy wondered. "As you well know," Mary continued, "we took you into our home when you were as yet unable to make your way in the world. You were only 6. For the most part, You have been dutiful, however. As you are approaching 21-1, we need to be assured of your best future. As you have no dowry to speak of, and no parents, this has made matters difficult in terms of attracting a suitor. Yes, Lizzie murmured, her face pale as she waited for Mary to announce the verdict. George and I have arranged for you to be married, Mary explained. You will be well provided for, of that you can be certain. Do I get to meet him first? Lizzie asked bleakly. Yes, of course, Mary said. And you shall have a chaperone living under the same roof prior to your marriage, his sister, Clara. When are we to meet? Lizzie asked. Do I know him? Perhaps, she thought, this wasn't as bad as it sounded. She wanted to start afresh. Maybe her husband-to-be was kind. Maybe she would grow to love him. No, you haven't met, Mary said. You see, he lives out west. He owns a ranch in a little town, Rosewood, in Texas. Lizzie felt nauseous, although she had eaten a full breakfast. I shall see to our tea, she said to steady her nerves. Good idea. I shall give you all the details over tea, Mary said approvingly before Lizzie returned not too long after. This tea tastes good, Mary said with a satisfied sigh after she took a sip. Lizzie hadn't touched hers. Okay, where were we? Mary asked. What is his name? Lizzie asked. Is he my age or much older? Her aunt looked annoyed at Lizzie's questions. His name is Lance Cromwell. He is comfortably off. And his age? Lizzie repeated. He is 26, Mary said dourly, as if she disliked that detail of the arrangement. I would have thought you'd be grateful, she added sternly. What difference would anything she said make anyway? Lizzie realized. While she resented the fact that Mary and George had arranged all this behind her back, perhaps in some ways it was a blessing. Maybe this new life as a wife to a stranger was better than her current situation. Thank you, Mary. Yes, I understand and appreciate that you were seeing to my future, Lizzie said. Mary nodded curtly. Good, because you just have a day before departing. A day? Lizzie gulped. Does that mean I leave tomorrow? Who is taking me? Yes, tomorrow, Mary said firmly. I have bought 3 dresses for you, her half-sister added. 2 for the journey and another to wear once you arrive. First impressions are important. Thank you, Lizzie conceded. 3 new dresses of her very own. Now she felt quite giddy with excitement, although bewildered. It is a long journey by train, 6 days, Mary added. I see, thank you, Lizzie replied. She would be sad to say goodbye to Gloria, but they could write to each other. You can pack and say your goodbyes today, Mary instructed. I am relieving you of your duties. Just see to our evening meal later. When Lizzie saw Gloria later, her friend's first reaction to the news was to look crestfallen. What am I going to do without you? She wailed. But Lizzie, this is exciting. Remember how I said you could live in a country manner? I am going to live on a ranch in Texas, Lizzie said with a pronounced twang. When can I visit? Gloria joked. Just let me settle in first, Lizzie laughed. The friends exchanged a bear hug as they said their goodbyes. They would stay in touch. Maybe it would be Gloria's turn next, and they would both be married women. Just imagine, after packing her few belongings, Lizzie went downstairs to make dinner. The family was quieter over dinner. They were probably all thinking about how different things would be without Lizzie in the house. George managed to cheer Lizzie by saying, The next time you see me, I will probably be gray from all the extra tasks that Mary has given me. You're gray already, his wife retorted with such good humor that they all burst out laughing. Chapter 8. Lizzie woke up early. She was glad the sky was blue rather than overcast on such a momentous day. The day marked the start of a new future for her. New beginnings could be exciting, she declared as she bounced out of bed. Lizzie was nervous. Any person would be. She knew that. Lizzie had already decided to wear the sun-yellow dress for her departure. It made her feel more confident that things would work out fine. Mary was to walk her to the train station. It was a short 15-minute walk to the station. As Lizzie had few possessions, her bag was relatively light. As they drew level with the train station, Mary stopped. I shall leave you here, Lizzie. We shall go our separate ways. Lizzie suddenly felt very alone in the world. It was quite peculiar how the feeling came over her, out of nowhere. Mary cleared her throat, businesslike rather than sisterly. She reached into her purse, safely tucked in her jacket pocket, and handed a few notes to Lizzie. It seemed quite a substantial sum in Lizzie's eyes. "Here is your train fare," Mary said. "Have you something to keep it in?" she added. Lizzie nodded. She could put it in her vanity case. "The train should arrive in half an hour," Mary explained. "No point in me staying with you. The train conductor will see to it that you get off at the right stop. It is a 6-day journey to Rosewood. Lizzie, you will reach your destination early on the afternoon of the 30th, her half-sister continued. There shouldn't be too many passengers on the train in the latter part of the journey. I am sure you will find it quite interesting as the train leaves the city and you see a bit of the country." "Who will meet me at the station?" Lizzie asked as the full enormity of her new life dawned on her. She was alone in the world, even if she was soon to be married. "Clara will meet you," Mary said. "I have arranged for her to meet you at 3 on the day you arrive. The train is scheduled to arrive well before that." "How will she identify me?" Lizzie asked worriedly. "She has a photograph of you," Mary said blazely. Lizzie stared at her. Of all the cheek, Lizzie thought. How many more surprises did her half-sister have in store for her? Mary's casual way of speaking about her situation emboldened her usually shy disposition. "Well," Lizzie began, "thank you for raising me all these years." That was all she could think of to say that seemed apt in terms of their relationship. "It was my duty," Mary shrugged, "wishing you all the best for your marriage and your future. You be a good girl." "All the best to you and your family," Lizzie replied politely. To her ears, they sounded like strangers rather than relatives. Their restraint spoke volumes. Lizzie smiled. She would much rather recall this moment on a happy note, she decided. "Please tell George I will miss his jokes," Mary groaned. "That is kind of you," she replied. "Goodbye, Lizzie." "All the best, Mary. Goodbye." They both turned and headed in their respective directions as a train chugged into the station. Lizzie approached the ticket office at the center of the hall nearest the platform. "You look the picture of springtime, my dear." An elderly gentleman greeted her. "How can I help you?" She smiled in return, relieved that her dress had made a good impression. "Good morning. I'd like to purchase a ticket to Rosewood." Seeing his surprise, Lizzie added, "Rosewood is in Texas." "Yes, my dear. That is a long journey traveling on your own. Been there before?" "Never," she shook her head. "I went there once," he commented. "Watched a rodeo with my wife. One of the best days of my life," he declared. It was Lizzie's turn to be surprised. He handed her a ticket. "The train departs in 20 minutes. Enjoy your journey, miss." "Thank you, I shall," she answered, hoping she would. Lizzie stepped gingerly onto the narrow step to board the train. She had only ever been on short train trips, never more than 30 minutes at most. Now here she was traveling clear across the country. Life was filled with surprises. Lizzie chose a cabin towards the middle of the train. That way, she figured she would be bothered less by people who were making short trips or who were possibly unruly. Although, as security was strict, she doubted there would be any commotion other than the train's sideways motion. She felt the tension in her neck ease after she had put her baggage in the overhead stowage of her cabin. What would the meals be like, she wondered. 6 days was a long time. Lizzie wouldn't have minded a cup of tea, but she dare not ask about buying refreshments until the train was well on its way. The young woman hadn't thought to pack herself refreshments of any kind, and nor had her half-sister, for that matter. "It's my birthday," she exclaimed out loud as the train driver blew the whistle to indicate that the train was leaving the station. There was a brief tap on the cabin door. "Did I hear you say it's your birthday?" the train conductor asked. "Yes, you heard correctly," Lizzie replied shyly. "Have a toffee, miss," he offered. Lizzie hesitated to accept the treat from a stranger. "Here, they are delicious," he added. The conductor popped one in his mouth as if to reassure Lizzie. "Thank you," Lizzie smiled as she helped herself. She blushed with embarrassment, yet she was delighted by his gesture. "Miss, lunch is served at 1 o'clock in the dining car if you'd like to get a bite to eat then. Their prices are quite reasonable." He tapped his cap in acknowledgement before he continued on his way. Lizzie sat down again. She wished she had thought to bring a book to read or knitting to occupy herself. It was quite peculiar not to be working or scrubbing and washing, although it was liberating. Being her birthday, she chose to savor the day and the adventure of it all. Although Mary could be harsh and she had always been demanding, perhaps on this occasion she had provided Lizzy a new start. That's the second time I have thought that, she reflected. So maybe it was true. Lizzy's spirits lifted as the locomotive driver sounded one last pull of the whistle to signal the steam train's imminent departure. The train began its journey with a slow start. As the train gathered speed, Lizzy thought, this is it. Would she ever visit New York again, she wondered. The only place she had ever known. The furthest she had ever traveled from home was 40 miles to attend a friend's wedding. She had her work cut out for her to plead her case to get that Saturday off a few months ago. Lizzy and Gloria had traveled together by horse carriage. The cart driver explained that they swapped horses halfway to ensure fresh legs for the last leg of their journey. And he had told them the first horse needed to rest for their return journey the next day. Mary had given Lizzy an extra load of washing on her return, no doubt to remind her that she was meant to attend to household chores rather than go gallivanting around the countryside. On many occasions, her strictness had meant that Lizzy lost touch with friends as they moved out of the heart of the city. While she could sympathize with the Micklethwaite's need to budget and not to spend money unnecessarily, it wasn't as if they paid her a salary or even an allowance. Besides, Mary was her half-sister rather than her employer. Lizzy shifted her attention to happier thoughts and the changing scenery outside the window. It's a new day and a new season, the bride-to-be reminded herself. As the locomotive left the city, vast expanses of land seemed to open up before her eyes. Farm workers working in the cornfields looked up and smiled as the locomotive rumbled past them. George had told her that steam trains reached speeds of 20 miles per hour. Although it wasn't particularly quick, traveling by train was far more comfortable than traveling by a horse carriage on bumpy, uneven tracks. Lizzy felt snug and safe in her cabin. As the miles widened between Lizzy and the life that she had left behind her, the journey was starting to feel marvelously freeing. After an hour or so, the repetitive sound of the train on its tracks, and even the occasional voice speaking in hushed tones in the passage outside her cabin, soothed her. The 21-year-old felt herself nodding off to sleep. Rather than resisting sleep, as she usually had to, she succumbed to its deep bliss. The shrill sounding of a bell woke her a while later. Startled, Lizzy opened her eyes. The scenery outside was still farmland. Horses were drawing plows that were making deep furrows in what looked like rich soil. A farmhand grinned and waved as he saw her face pressed against the window. Lizzy waved back. Why not? Just then, there was a tap at the door. Yes, she answered politely as she cautiously slid the cabin door open. Miss, lunch is being served now if you would like to partake, the conductor invited. The maple syrup pancakes are always good, or there's soup and fresh rolls if you would prefer something more filling. That sounds wonderful. Thank you, Lizzy replied. She really is a pretty young woman, the conductor observed, thinking that it did not seem right for her to be traveling unaccompanied, especially over several days. The railroad man felt protective towards her. His youngest daughter had recently married, and she was about the same age. Anyway, he was looking to visit his daughter the following spring out west. His wife was already planning their excursion for next year. Lizzy checked her appearance in her handheld vanity mirror. She looked fresh aside from a slightly crumpled bodice. She undid her long hair, drew a comb through it, and then fastened it loosely at the nape of her neck with a clip. Satisfied that she was presentable, the young woman closed her vanity case, checked her money, and secured it inside her bodice. The dining car was fuller than Lizzy had expected, although several tables were still unoccupied. Thankfully, she wasn't the only passenger dining alone, which made her feel less conspicuous. Lizzy sat down at a table near a lady in her 60s. Elegant in appearance and manner, she looked up from the menu she was scanning and then tilted her head downwards again to study the menu. Relieved to be left to her thoughts, Lizzy was startled by a familiar voice. Well, I never, if it isn't Lizzy Goodman. Ann Booth, Lizzy's middle school teacher, stood looking down at her with an expression of both delight and curiosity. She had taught Lizzy geography, and Lizzy remembered that she had been entertaining as well as knowledgeable. She had told the class of 10-year-olds that the world was much smaller yet bigger than people imagined. It all depended on their frame of reference. Up to this moment, Lizzy had never grasped the gravity of what the teacher had said. After having watched what seemed endless fields of farmland unfold before her eyes, the world seemed immense. Now, with Miss Booth's appearance, the world seemed to have shrunk. "Good afternoon, ma'am," Lizzy replied, a smile lighting up her pretty face. "You may call me Anne now that you are a young lady," the older woman suggested. "Hello, Anne," Lizzy corrected. "I am famished," Anne declared as she sat down, took off her hat, and placed it neatly beside her. "Have you decided what to order yet?" "No, not yet," Lizzy said, surprised at her question. "I am also quite hungry, but the pancakes are apparently very good," she added as if to explain her indecision. "You need more than a pancake to sustain you on a journey, Lizzy," Anne said. "I am going to order the fish," the teacher declared. She sat back in her seat and studied Lizzy frankly. "Do you mind if I ask the purpose of your journey?" "I don't mind you asking," Lizzy said. She was happy to have a companion she knew to talk to. She lowered her voice. "I am traveling west to marry a rancher. My sister arranged it all," she continued. "I see," Anne said. Her face brightened with interest. "Have you been writing to each other for several months, then?" Lizzy felt her cheeks blush before she answered. "No, I was only advised of the arrangement yesterday." Anne's face registered shock, followed by sympathy. She extended her hand to gently cover Lizzy's. "Is he a good man as far as you can tell from what you have been told?" Lizzy hesitated. What did she really know of him besides his apparent wealth? "My sister advised me that he is a rancher. He is 26 years old and handsome," Lizzy confided. She paused as a waiter appeared to take their order. Lizzy ordered a sandwich after Anne had placed her order of fish. The waiter left them with a courteous nod, and Anne leaned forward, her face earnest yet kind. "So you have a photograph of your husband-to-be?" she asked. Lizzy shook her head. Anne looked puzzled. "But he surely has a photograph of you?" she said slowly, as she considered the arrangement. "Yes, he has a photograph of me," Lizzy said. She decided that she didn't want to speak of this anymore. She could understand Anne's reservations, but this new beginning had already been set in motion. As if reading her mind, Anne was silent. She opened her bag, and after a moment of searching, she retrieved a pencil and a notepad. Anne placed it on the surface between them. "Please write to me if you are ever in need of anything," Anne said encouragingly. "If you are agreeable, please write down your address and the name of your husband-to-be." "Thank you," Lizzy said quietly. She wrote his name and address as Lance Cromwell, Steer Ranch, Rosewood, Texas, adding for good measure, Bess Cromwell, sister of Lance, at the same address. Anne read the details carefully after first putting on her spectacles. Satisfied, she turned over to the next page, wrote her details, and tore the page out of the small notepad. Anne handed the slip of paper to Lizzy, who accepted it gratefully, folding it and placing it in her lap, out of sight. "I am sure your sister would have arranged that you marry a decent man," Anne said consolingly. "We can stay in touch and exchange pleasantries about the Texan style of living," she teased. "I am so glad we have met up again," Lizzy agreed, grateful to have renewed acquaintance with Anne, and astonished that they would be living in close proximity to each other. Anne lived in the closest town to Rosewood. "How wonderfully small the world can be," Lizzy declared. "Amen to that," Anne said as her eyes sparkled with amusement. "Ladies, luncheon is served," the waiter announced as he set their plates down with a flourish. "To Lizzy and her happiness," Anne said, raising a glass. Lizzy raised hers in return. "To good friends, old and new," Lizzy suggested. "I am not that old," Anne joked. "I never meant that," Lizzy giggled. After they had finished their meals, which they agreed were astonishingly tasty, the waiter reappeared with the conductor in tow. "This gentleman wondered if you ladies would care to try a dessert on the house." Train," the waiter offered. "Seeing as it's your birthday," the conductor added. Lizzy burst into delighted laughter, while Anne looked on, amazed. "Thank you very much. We would like that. That is very generous of you." The birthday girl accepted. "You never told me it's your birthday," Anne said as the waiter bustled off to fetch 2 chocolate desserts. We were too busy catching up, Lizzy said. I can hardly believe I am 21 myself. Well, you are off to a good start to your new life out west, Anne said in a hushed tone. She was aware that the couple at the next table was watching them with keen interest. Happy birthday, young Lizzy. Please accept the meal as my treat. Thank you. I look forward to returning the favor in Texas, Lizzy confided. She wasn't used to people she barely knew being so kind to her. Later that evening, as she settled into her bed in her cabin, Lizzy cast her mind back to her room in the basement in New York. It had been cool and musty even in summer. Her first day on the train had been far happier than she could ever have imagined. Her thoughts returned to Lance Cromwell. She pictured him as tall with broad shoulders, or on second thoughts, perhaps not. Her logic told her if he spent a lot of time herding cattle on horseback, he was more likely to be lean. When she tried to picture his face, she couldn't, or rather she dare not. That way she wouldn't be disappointed. Anyway, it was the heart that mattered in a marriage, not appearance, she told herself. Chapter 9. Lizzy woke up the next morning feeling stiff. At first, she assumed the cause of her aching muscles to be sleeping in the cabin bed, but she recalled falling asleep almost as soon as she closed her eyes. She had only woken once during the evening when the train had stopped at a small station in what seemed the middle of nowhere. No one had got on or off as far as she could see. It must have been the early hours of the morning by then. She touched her forehead to see if she was feverish. It was cool rather than warm. She shrugged off the aching feeling as the result of sleeping on a firmer bed than she was accustomed to. Lizzy opened her baggage. She didn't want to wear the sun-yellow dress for 2 days running if she could help it. Perhaps she could dab the collar and cuffs with soap in the wash basin later so that she could wear it the following day. She decided to wear the sage green dress. The cool blue dress seemed best for the day she arrived at the ranch. Lizzy felt instinctively that she had made the right choice. While they may have an arranged marriage, she didn't want to appear a walkover or desperate. She was neither, even if her half-sister had arranged it behind her back. Lizzy wanted to meet Lance as an equal, regardless of having no say in the matter of their marriage up to that point. Anne Booth wasn't in the dining room this morning. Lizzy chose oatmeal and settled back in her seat. A toddler played a game of peekaboo behind the shelter of his mother's basket until she told him off for staring. He kicked the table instead until his mother raised her voice at him. Then, to his mother's relief, his oatmeal arrived, and he tucked in with gusto, after first swirling the milk around until the sides of the bowl were all milky. Lizzy could understand his restlessness. A child that age had so much energy, and there was nowhere to direct all that exuberance. She considered offering to help the young mother, and then decided against it. She had enough mountains of her own to climb in the foreseeable future. Best, she conserve her energy for her arrival and the adjustment that would come with new surroundings and life with a man she had never met. Lizzy focused her attention on her hands, which were dry and calloused. Hopefully, with time and less housework, they would become softer. A different waiter served her this morning. This one was younger and quite flirtatious. Lizzy ignored his hint that they meet after lunch on his tea break. She wouldn't have taken him up on his invitation in her own neighborhood, let alone on a train far from home. Her oatmeal tasted better than her own attempts at it made back home. The cook had added a dab of butter, making it creamy. Lizzy made a mental note to try that out in her kitchen in Texas, her very own kitchen. Breakfast over, Lizzy contemplated how to spend her day. She glanced at the map of the route printed on the back of the menu, which provided no clues. Anne had mentioned how, on a previous train journey, she had been fortunate to sit in the rear car with no other passengers in sight. She had enjoyed watching the sunset, uninterrupted for a full hour. Anne confided that she had been so mesmerized by the beautiful crimson and peach hues that she almost forgot about dinner time. Lizzy returned to her cabin. The same lady that she had seen at breakfast had settled in on the seat Lizzy had sat on the previous day, her toddler alongside her. They had taken up residence on the lower bunks, which meant she would have to sleep on the upper bunk. "Good afternoon," the lady greeted her. "Good afternoon," Lizzy replied politely. She placed her baggage carefully on the top bunk and then settled herself opposite them on the seat below, her hands folded in her lap. The little boy's toys were scattered next to her. She wasn't quite sure whether to initiate conversation or to admire the scenery. Quiet by nature, Lizzy decided she would leave it up to the lady. She seemed content, just sitting there quietly, while her little boy pretended he was the locomotive driver. He asked his mother for her train fare. She playfully told him not to be silly and that she had already paid. He giggled at her joke, then turned to face Lizzy. "Madam, could I have your ticket, please?" he asked. Lizzy pretended to search her baggage and then peered under her seat. She looked up at the ceiling as if a ticket would magically appear from thin air. "I appear to have lost it," she replied with an exaggerated sigh. The boy's mother was also smiling now, enjoying her play acting. "You must have your ticket," the boy said sternly. He sat down next to her as if to console her. Lizzy leaned forward and plucked an imaginary ticket from behind his ear. "Oh my goodness, here it is," she exclaimed. The boy giggled, delighted by her comedy. "Do that again," he insisted. "Do what again?" Lizzy asked as she feigned ignorance. "Find the ticket behind my ear," he pronounced as he moved closer to sit alongside her. "David, please leave the lady alone. My apologies," his mother said with a smile. "My name is Catherine Townsend." "No harm done," Lizzy laughed. "David is delightful. My name is Lizzy Goodman. Pleased to meet you both." David looked at them solemnly. "Are you also traveling far?" he asked. "Yes, I am," Lizzy replied. "All the way to Texas." "Why, so are we," Catherine replied. Lizzy just smiled. She wasn't going to share her reason for traveling with a stranger, especially when the little boy, sweet though he was, would not have the discretion to keep her status a secret. People talk, especially in rural settings. Lizzy doubted that Lance would want people to be talking about the arranged marriage either. No, she decided, this is not for public consumption until Lance and I have met. "I am a governess," Catherine said as if to break the ice. "I see," Lizzy said. She waited for Catherine to continue. When she didn't, Lizzy considered her options. Tell her the truth or a watered-down version of it? "I am assisting with the cooking at a ranch in the area," Lizzy said. She noticed Catherine's surprise. "I needed a change in scenery," Lizzy added. Catherine seemed to visibly relax at her explanation, no doubt wondering why she would travel so far from home on her own. "It is a big step," Catherine said. "I am moving for a different reason, but it's big for anyone, especially for women. I have family who settled in the region a few years ago. Their children are almost school-going age, so it was decided that I assist with their schooling. It is a good arrangement for both of us." Their conversation was interrupted by a tap on the cabin door. Lizzy stood up and slid the door open a notch. "Oh, good, this is your cabin," Anne said. "Come in," Lizzy invited her. She introduced Anne to her new acquaintance, after which she sat down with a satisfied sigh. "I have had the loveliest morning," she declared. "I met a lady competent in playing the piano. She has given me the details of a tutor in Rosewood. Guess what her name is?" "I give up," Lizzy said. Anne was a lady to be admired. Was there no end to her talents? "Clara Cromwell," Anne said. Astounded at the coincidence, Lizzy raised her eyebrows. "She is known in the region for her musical ability, and what's more, Lance is a good singer." "Tell me more over dinner," Lizzy suggested. She ignored Anne's surprise at her reserve. "I know of the Cromwells," Catherine remarked. Lizzy and Anne exchanged a glance as they registered surprise. "Lance Cromwell is engaged to be married. I hear she is very beautiful. Lance lost his parents a few years ago and has been quite lonesome without them, or so my uncle says." "Good for him," Anne said. "Rather commit to someone than wander aimlessly through life." Lizzy held her tongue and her breath. She wondered how Anne managed to keep a straight face. "Anne, would you like a walk up the passage for some exercise?" Lizzy suggested. She prayed Anne would behave and agree. Yes, certainly," Anne replied, much to Lizzy's relief. "Please excuse us," Lizzy said. Catherine smiled. "Of course, I know it's early in the day, but I will take the opportunity to have a nap." David grumbled. He was clearly unimpressed at the idea of having to stay put when Lizzy and Anne left the cabin. "You are impossible," Lizzy whispered to Anne as soon as they were out of earshot. That was a close call, Mrs. Cromwell to be, Anne said softly. You do realize your traveling companion will know soon enough. Not if I can help it. Just let me meet him first, Lizzie retorted in good humor while also serious. She prodded Anne on the arm. Why don't we see if there's space to sit in the rear car? Anne turned and looked at her skeptically. Okay, but it's likely to be full. I shall take my chances, Lizzie said, her fear of the future subsiding as she decided to enjoy the present instead. Chapter 10. Lance Cromwell felt as nervous as a wild colt settling in a corral as he remembered that today was the day. Not the day of his wedding. That was still a month away. Today he was meeting his bride-to-be for the first time, Lizzie. He prayed that her appearance would live up to her photograph, and most of all that Lizzie's character and disposition were as appealing as Mary Micklethwaite had indicated. Mary had first described Lizzie in a letter after responding to Lance's advertisement for a mail-order bride. As much intrigued by curiosity as the longing to have a suitable wife by his side, Lance finally agreed to meet Mary. She had indicated in her letter that she was representing Lizzie's best interests by her insistence on meeting Lizzie's prospective husband face to face. Lance had thought her request quite noble. That was until Mary Micklethwaite had turned up at Rosewood Ranch along with her husband and children 2 months ago. Lance had indicated quite plainly to Mary and George that his generosity did not extend beyond a fee for the bride. He recognized Mary as a manipulator. He wasn't accustomed to a woman bargaining or insisting that an arrangement be on her terms, or she would call it off. The ranch owner would never have admitted to Mary Micklethwaite that the photograph of Lizzie had captivated him from the start. Not only her beauty, that was there for anyone to see. What had surprised Lance was the intelligence and candor in Lizzie's eyes, to an extent that held his attention. Lizzie's photograph was tucked behind a picture of his parents, and just as he had loved them dearly, he hoped to cherish Lizzie too. He missed his parents' love, their friendship, and the easy banter they used to share. He was blessed in the knowledge that they had lived a good life, even if their start had not been easy. His parents had earned the right to be known as the finest cattle breeders in the area, and they were well liked too, except by those jealous of their success, who thankfully were few and far between. Today, the reality of Lance's decision was finally here. There was no going back on his word. He planned to marry Lizzy Goodman at the end of September, well before winter set in. Lance thought it only fair to give Lizzie time to settle in at Rosewood Ranch before pledging herself to be married to him. He laughed wryly. He needed some time to settle into the idea, too. Clara Cromwell was excited for her brother. She knew he would make a good husband. He was kind, fair, and handsome. She hadn't shared his decision with anybody. Lance had only told her of his decision a week ago. After the initial shock had subsided, Clara had warmed to the idea. Clara could tell that Lance was lonely at times, even though he led an active life. Lance rose well before dawn, and he worked until after dusk on most days. Cattle didn't keep regular hours, Clara considered. A cow could be in distress and need help with calving. Sometimes a coyote got into a cattle pen or a field and wrought havoc. Life was never dull, that was for sure. Yet life was mostly rewarding at Rosewood Ranch. Casting her brother's arrangements aside, for the time being, Clara put on a bonnet. It was still warm despite heading towards late afternoon. She got in the buggy. "All set, ma'am?" Robert asked. He was keen to get going. "Yes, thanks, Robert," she answered, clutching the buggy as the horse set off at a trot. It wasn't his place to tell Clara when to leave for the station, but she was cutting it fine. The horse could only go so fast. On top of that, Clara had decided at the last minute to take her friend Bessie up on her offer of a drink together at the diner on the way there. Why she couldn't have met Bessie on another day was beyond him. Still, she was a good girl, Robert reflected. Clara was a woman now. He corrected himself. Clara was having similar thoughts. She was the same age as Lizzie, having turned 21 a few months before. She didn't know Lizzie's exact birth date, but Lance had said she was almost 21. Robert had worked on the ranch since the early days when Clara's parents had arrived. He reckoned this afternoon Clara was running considerably behind schedule. It had been unavoidable, Clara explained. Robert didn't know why, but he never quite trusted Bessie, even as a young child. She struck him as a bit of a schemer. Robert, being a charitable man, had never shared his misgivings with anyone, not even his wife. When Clara had finally said she must get going, Bessie had cajoled the reason for her trip to the station out of her. Clara had felt a pang of disloyalty to her brother immediately afterward. She reasoned that Bessie would know soon enough anyway, so no harm done. Bessie lived at the ranch and kept house for Lance. She lived on the property in a small cottage nearby. She had her heart set on marrying Lance, not that she had ever made this admission to his sister. Clara didn't notice the jealousy in Bessie's eyes as she had been distracted by a person entering the general dealer. When Clara turned her steady gaze on her friend, Bessie appeared composed. "How soon is the wedding?" Bessie asked, her voice level. Bessie's feelings were a seething current of anger and hurt behind her cool composure. She would never disclose her plans to Clara, despite their friendship. Bessie was too proud for that. "They're getting married in a month." "Can you believe it?" Clara asked. "Their wedding is to be held at Rosewood Town Church." Bessie took a long sip of her drink to hide her dismay and internal shaking. Then she looked up. "It is very sudden," Bessie said quietly. She gave a brief smile as a thought occurred to her. "You better not hold up Lance's bride-to-be. Please, could I tag along so I get to meet her too?" Clara looked doubtful. "I don't know if that's wise," she considered. "I thought we were friends," Bessie pouted. Inwardly, Bessie felt a rising panic. She saw her childhood fantasy of marrying Lance drifting away. She would do everything in her power to stop the wedding, Bessie decided. Meanwhile, as the train came to a standstill at Rosewood Station, Lizzy felt time slow down. She had pictured this moment many times, and now it was here. Lizzy wondered what would happen next, and how she would feel in a day or two, or even a year. After waiting for close to an hour for Clara to show up at the train station, Lizzy gave up glancing up and down the station platform. Clara was nowhere in sight. Had Lance changed his mind about marrying her? Perhaps Clara had just been delayed, or maybe Mary had muddled the days when she had made arrangements. Knowing her sister, that wasn't very likely. The bride-to-be was starting to feel anxious about her predicament. She sat down on a bench and closed her eyes to compose herself. Lizzy took a deep breath in and then exhaled. A midwife had told Lizzy that breathing in that way could soothe the nerves. Her eyes were still closed when Lizzy heard a young female voice call out, "Oh my goodness, what a relief, there you are." Lizzy opened her eyes to see a pretty young woman about her own age walking briskly towards her with another lady beside her. The lady who had spoken held out an outstretched hand. "My name is Clara Cromwell. I am Lance's sister." The other lady looked on aloofly. Her manner reminded Lizzy of Mary, only she was much prettier and younger. Also about her age, Lizzy figured. Lizzy took Clara's hand and shook it warmly. "I am Lizzy Goodman. I am so relieved to see you." "I was becoming quite concerned," she admitted. "My apologies for being late," Clara said. "I met my friend on the way and we were delayed. Lizzy, meet Bessie." When Lizzy extended her hand out to Bessie, she accepted it but shook her hand limply, as if she pitied her. Bessie's lack of warmth was lost on Clara as she tried to cover her embarrassment at being so late. "Oh dear, that is not much of an excuse, is it?" Clara added with a wry smile. Bessie looked on as if she would much rather be elsewhere. Lizzy decided to ignore Bessie's bad manners. Clara seemed pleasant, and that put her mind at ease. She was Lance's sister, after all. "Apology accepted. Is the ranch quite a distance from the station?" Lizzy asked out of curiosity as much as to make conversation. She was still trying to get her bearings. As far as she could gather, Rosewood Town appeared to have a population of no more than 70 people. Lizzy was surprised, quite frankly, that they even had a train station. She kept that observation to herself. "No, it's not far from here at all," Clara replied, after a moment's reflection. "About 3 miles, that's all." Lizzy was relieved to hear that. "Are we walking to the ranch?" she asked. Lizzy accepted Clara's offer to take her baggage. They could take turns carrying it, although looking at Bessie's demeanor, an offer of help from her was not likely to be forthcoming. "My goodness, no," Clara laughed. "We would never expect you to walk after your long journey. We have a horse and buggy waiting outside." I understand you left New York on the 25th of August, Clara continued. Yes, I left on my birthday, Lizzy said. I only realized as I was settling into my seat. Lizzy is not spoiled then, Clara noted. On your birthday, she exclaimed. Did you have cake on the train? I wouldn't want to celebrate my birthday alone, she confided. Yes, I was fortunate to have both dessert and company, Lizzy said. I renewed acquaintance with a middle school teacher of mine, and she treated me to lunch, and the conductor treated us to dessert, which was very sweet. Clara absorbed this revelation with concern. Lance had been assured of Lizzy's reticence in social situations. She was well liked, but shy with people she did not know, and was not really partial to small talk. She hoped Lizzy's sister had described her character accurately. Should she mention her observation to Lance? Clara decided against it. Lance was already anxious about meeting Lizzy today, which was understandable. He had tried to hide his anxiety. She knew her brother well enough to recognize the signs. Lance had pushed his breakfast aside that morning and left it half-eaten. It was unusual for him to let food go to waste. She suggested that he fetch Lizzy from the station himself. He had told Clara that there would be time enough for them to get to know each other. Lance hadn't meant that in a grumpy way. He was just being his kind, considerate self. The general talk was that Lance was considered a catch. He was a gentleman, despite his mental toughness and strong physique. He was the first to admit that he set high standards, perhaps too high. Bessie observed Lizzy's profile as she turned to gaze in wonder at the scenery. She was exceptionally pretty, which bothered Bessie as much as the realization that she was about to meet Lance face to face, and he was likely to reach the same conclusion. Rosewood Ranch came into view as the buggy rounded the curve of the narrow, dusty track. Lizzy looked with wonder at the scene that greeted her. A large oak tree was the first thing she noticed, and then lush green grass. Several horses were grazing on the grass beyond the oak tree. A separate corral was empty but looked well used. There was a worn path around its perimeter. When Lizzy's eyes finally rested on the house, she was overawed. The whitewashed building was not only generous in its dimensions but was positioned to face west. The dappled sunlight which filtered through the windows created a hazy effect. Your homestead is lovely, Lizzy said shyly. Clara glanced at Lizzy's face. She looked quite fragile. It is to be your home, Clara said gently, and then Lizzy quite unexpectedly burst into tears. Chapter 11. Lizzy had been so overwhelmed by the contrast between her old life of drudgery and endless chores and the new possibility of being truly loved. That realization, as well as the beautiful surroundings, caused the tears to flow freely down her cheeks. She wiped at them with the corner of her handkerchief. Lizzy, you must be tired after your journey, Clara said gently. She remembered Bessie and turned to speak to her, and was surprised to see that Bessie had already stepped off the buggy, although they had barely stopped. See you in the house, Clara instructed. She remembered that Bessie wasn't even supposed to know about her brother's upcoming marriage to Lizzy. See you soon, Bessie replied gravely. Clara watched her friend thoughtfully as she entered the house. She didn't seem herself today. I am fine now, Clara, Lizzy said as she tucked her handkerchief into a small hold-all alongside her baggage. Thank you for your kindness, Clara smiled in reply, relieved that Lizzy was feeling better. A tall figure appeared in the front doorway, silhouetted against the late afternoon sunshine. He walked swiftly towards them with energy and purpose. As Lance came alongside the buggy, he looked up at his sister and then at the woman seated beside her wearing the sky-blue dress and featuring flyaway blonde hair. His first impression of Lizzy took his breath away, not just her beauty. She had such a sweet face, and he hadn't expected her to be so dainty. Lance, meet Lizzy, Clara introduced, amused at her brother's reaction. Usually confident, he seemed at a loss for words. Lizzy held a hand out to him. Hello, Lance. It is good to meet you. He laughed with relief. Her voice was lovely, too. Lance extended his hand to Lizzy and then helped her out of the buggy. Her hand felt small in his. As they stood together, he realized that he hadn't yet spoken. Welcome to your new home, Lizzy, Lance said, as his dark eyes met hers intently. I hope that you will be happy here. Thank you, Lance, Lizzy said shyly. Clara has been most kind to me already. I was a bit late, Clara confessed. She stepped off the buggy's siding board with joyful exuberance after taking her brother's offered hand for support. Lance raised his eyebrows in surprise. I met up with Bessie, and time ran away with us, Lance's sister explained. He frowned, but in a playful way. Lance decided to overlook his sister's tardiness on this occasion, as Lizzy seemed well taken care of in other respects, although it couldn't have made a good impression for his wife-to-be. Clara, I suggest you take Lizzy to her room so that she can settle in. Then she can join us on the porch for tea in about an hour, Lance suggested. Would you like that, Lizzy? Lance asked. Lizzy nodded. Yes, thank you. That would be perfect, she replied. The bride-to-be felt out of her depth. It wasn't just that Lance was handsome, but that he seemed caring and kind too. Could she really be blessed with such good fortune? I will carry that, Lance offered as he relieved Lizzy of her baggage. Their hands touched briefly, and he stopped himself from pressing his hand to her shoulder to reassure her of his good intentions. Clara and Lizzy trailed behind him. Clara had engaged Lizzy in conversation about her piano skills. Lizzy listened politely, not having much choice. His sister always became quite animated when she spoke about music. There would be time enough for Lizzy to hear how well Clara played the piano. Lizzy, I shall see you in about an hour on the porch. Clara, could you please arrange tea for the three of us? Of course, Clara said brightly. She adored her brother, and she could see he had been mesmerized by Lizzy's beauty when she had introduced them. He was usually cautious in matters of the heart. They appeared well suited, Clara reflected, pleased to reach that conclusion. Lizzy, I shall see you later, Lance said with a boyish grin. He felt much more relaxed now that he had met her. I look forward to it, Lizzy said. Her bedroom looked out over the front lawn. Lizzy could see the horses nearby. Some of them had moved nearer to the oak tree. The horses grazed vigorously, and they seemed as content and comfortable as Lizzy felt in that moment. Lizzy stood at the window a while longer. The sweet smell of jasmine wafted through the open window. Maybe she would get a sprig later and put it in a vase on her bedside table. Jasmine was among her favorite scents. Lizzy turned and went to the dressing table. She had never had one of her own. Her hair was tousled, and she had done the best she could to neaten herself at the train station. What must Lance have thought of her? Tendrils of her silky hair had escaped her chignon. Her complexion was a good color, she noted. Perhaps it was the country air. Incredible to think that she now lived on a cattle ranch in Texas. She was looking forward to exploring the ranch further and getting to know Lance better, although she was nervous. When Lizzy returned to the porch an hour later, she could hear the sound of chatter. Hello again, she said tentatively as she approached Lance and Clara. Bessie was nowhere to be seen, thankfully. Lance stood up from the wicker chair he had been sitting in. Hello, Lizzy? As he looked at her, she felt her pulse quicken, but gave no hint of it. Lizzy smiled at Gloria to change her focus. This was their home after all. While she would soon be Lance's wife, for the time being, she was their guest rather than family. Bessie has done us proud, Lance said with a grin as Lizzie's eyes rested on the tea trolley. Would you like a scone, Lizzy? Clara asked as she leaned towards the trolley. Yes, thank you, Lizzy replied as she accepted a plate from Clara. They remind me of home, Lizzy added quietly. Lance's eyes were warm and approving as they exchanged a glance. My mother used to make them. So did ours, Clara shared. Lance and I used to help her make them when we were little. The thought of Lance in the kitchen amused Lizzy. Lance returned Lizzie's smile with a grin. Looking back, I was probably more of a hindrance than a help, Lance admitted. I used to eat the batter while her back was turned. Lizzy giggled. While the day was still warm, some gray clouds were gathering from the east. They looked beautiful against the golden glow of the sunset. Looks like we may have a thunderstorm later, Lance commented with a slight frown. Where do the horses go when it rains? Lizzy asked. She blushed immediately, realizing her blunder. I sound like a real city girl, Lance laughed. He appreciated her frankness and her intelligence. Lizzy, I know this is all new to you. Don't worry, nature teaches me something new every day. The horses generally stay outside, except for the months when it snows, Lance explained. And when we have thunderstorms, he added with emphasis. Lizzy smiled. We have stables in the homestead. Judging by the speed at which those clouds are gathering, I may need to excuse myself quite soon. As Lizzy learned more about life on the ranch from their conversation, as well as the banter between Lance and his sister, she wondered what her friend Gloria would think of it all. Lizzy decided she would share little information about Lance, other than he appeared to be a kind man. Sempt. It seemed proper to treat their courting as a private matter, even if they were not yet husband and wife. Lizzy realized that she needed to speak to Lance about inviting Gloria to their wedding. Gloria was her nearest and dearest friend in the whole world, and so it was important that she attend the wedding. Although Gloria wasn't so near anymore, she reflected glumly. Her friend being so many miles away was the only dim light on what had otherwise been a wonderful day. It was too soon to know for sure whether she would be content here, but she sure was going to give it her best attempt. Lizzy could scarcely believe that her wedding to Lance was just around the corner, and she didn't even have a wedding dress yet. She giggled when she thought back to the afternoon she had practiced being a bride, using Gloria's net curtain as a veil, and almost taking the curtain track down in the process. Share the joke? Lance asked with a smile. He welcomed the opportunity to chat to Lizzy privately, perhaps the following afternoon, after he had checked that the roundup was going smoothly. Much as he loved his sister, he could see that getting to know Lizzy would be much easier without Clara's constant chatter. Just remembering my friend back home, Lizzy said. This is your home, Lizzy, Lance said after a brief pause. Her comment worried him. Was Lizzy having second thoughts? Yes, thank you. It is just an adjustment to be in a new place. That's all. Besides, it is truly lovely here, Lizzy said. She flushed as he met her gaze. Lance softened as he saw that she was clearly flustered. Give the girl a break, he told himself sternly. She has barely arrived, and here you are trying to convince her to love you. You mentioned a roundup when you were speaking to Clara earlier. What are you referring to? Lizzy asked. Lance looked at her, and then he threw his head back and roared with laughter. Lizzy wondered what she had said that was so funny. Seemed like small talk, so why the hilarity? She looked at him in confusion. After his laughter subsided, Lance wiped his eyes with the palms of his hands. He owed Lizzy a proper explanation if she was to be a rancher's wife. Ranchers let their cattle loose to roam the prairie. Those who farm sheep do the same. Most of the grazing land is owned by the government, Lance explained. Lizzy nodded with interest. But how do you make sure your cattle and sheep don't get all mixed up or lost? Lizzy asked. Good question, he said, quelling his desire to smile at her earnest expression. That government land is known as the open range. Twice a year, cowboys round up cattle, so we know which stock belongs to which ranch. In the spring, they brand the calves, and in the fall, we gather steers for sale. That is such a clever system, Lizzy said as she clapped her hands in wonder. Thank you, Lance said. Roundups are mighty tiring, I can tell you. Cattle don't always come when you call them. Now you are teasing, Lizzy laughed. You learn quickly, Lance said approvingly. Anyway, all this is set to change soon, he reflected. Why is that? Lizzy asked, intrigued. Some clever inventor invented something called barbed wire to protect fields from overgrazing, Lance explained. So a lot more farmers, myself included, are going to fence off their land to protect grazing land. Could I help with a roundup? Lizzy asked. She wanted to be useful too. Besides, she wasn't accustomed to being idle while others worked. Lance's eyes sparkled at the idea of Lizzy on the range among the cowboys, aggressive steers, and sometimes herds of bison. He wondered if she even knew how to ride a horse. Can you ride a horse? He asked kindly. She shook her head. Well then, I need to teach you, Lance suggested. You may enjoy it. Thanks for the offer, but tomorrow's roundup should hopefully work out fine. Chapter 12. A thunderclap sounded on the horizon. Lance stood up and stared across the field as he tried to gauge how soon the storm would arrive at the homestead and the severity of it. A bolt of lightning shot across the sky like a warning to hurry up. Beautiful, isn't it? Clara remarked as the sky flickered above their heads and the rain came pelting down. Yes, but from a distance, Lizzie said. The women scurried into the house for cover, while Lance grabbed his waterproof jacket. The horses were already edgy. A stallion looked like he was deciding whether to make a go of it over the fence. He trotted over to the other horses instead. They huddled together for comfort as much as protection as the rain increased in intensity. "See you later," Lance shouted over the storm as he stuck his head in the front room where Clara and Lizzie were sitting at a distance from the window. "Be safe," Lizzie said. She was already concerned for him, and he had only dashed outside for a moment to grab the harnesses. "Yes, be safe out there," Clara added. "Lizzie, it looks like dinner may be served later this evening. The ranch hands will need to see that the horses and livestock are calm before we all settle in for the evening." "Could I help to get the dinner ready?" Lizzie offered. "No need," Clara replied. "Bessie is our housemaid." "Oh?" Lizzie replied. She was surprised at this information as Bessie and Clara seemed so close. In New York, maids and their employers didn't mix socially. For no reason that she could fathom, Bessie's presence made her uneasy. Lizzie distrusted her. The thought occurred to her that Bessie may be jealous of her relationship with Lance because she had designs on him herself. He didn't appear to have feelings for Bessie, though, which might explain her unfriendliness towards Lizzie. Eventually, Lance returned. His hair was wet despite his oilskins. Lizzie thought he looked like a man on a mission, determined, exhausted, and thankful his duties were done. "Don't get comfortable yet, Lance," Clara commented. "Why not?" he asked, water dripping off his raincoat onto the mat. "With the ranch hands still busy with the cattle, there is no one to take Bessie home in this weather," his sister explained. "Please be a dear and take her home." Lance grimaced. He had been looking forward to relaxing. Thankfully, Bessie's cottage was a short distance away, perhaps a mile, although in this weather it would feel further. "Is Bessie ready?" Lance asked. "She is just finishing up preparing vegetables for dinner. I shall tell her to go up front of the house immediately." "Do that, please," Lance said with a relieved sigh. He held up his hands and then let them drop to his sides. "Please excuse me, Lizzie. This change of plan cannot be helped. This is the way of ranching. But it does have its benefits, too, I assure you." He gave her a wry smile. "Thank you, Lance. I do understand," Lizzie said, "and it is admirable that you look after your staff so well." Again, she got that uneasy feeling in the pit of her stomach. She couldn't shake off the feeling that Bessie meant trouble. Bessie walked past the room without so much as a glance in her direction. She was pretty, Lizzie conceded, but she certainly wasn't making her feel welcome. The front door closed with a soft thud behind her, and Lizzie was left alone with her thoughts. "I don't envy my brother going back out there," Clara exclaimed on her return. She carried a plate of freshly baked treats and a bowl of what looked like steaming broth. "As the weather has taken such a turn, I thought we could eat in here since it is much warmer than the kitchen." "We shall have a proper dinner later on Lance's return," Clara added, as if reading Lizzie's mind. She was wondering what Lance was going to eat. "You can help me make dinner later. This will give us energy," Clara continued. "Besides, we need to get to know each better if you are to be my sister-in-law. I am excited about the wedding, I can tell you, not just because you're getting married. We seldom have opportunities to dress up in Rosewood Town," Clara explained. "I was wondering about a dress good enough to wear for the wedding," Lizzie admitted. "Oh, don't worry about that," Clara said. "We have a surprise in store for you." Lizzie hoped she wasn't expected to squeeze into some long-forgotten heirloom that had been stored in an attic somewhere. She didn't mind the something borrowed element of wedding tradition. There was a sentimentality in that, but as a mail-order bride, she hoped for a dress suited to her. Sure, she had given up her old life and had made peace with that, but she didn't want to emulate someone else's identity. Lizzie also sensed that Lance would prefer her to be straightforward in her dealings with him. And so far, Lance had exceeded her expectations as a future husband. When Lizzie, how her sister's matchmaking may have turned out if arrangements had gone belly up, she was just thankful to be with respectable, good people. Lance handed Bessie a woolen throw. It wouldn't keep her dry, but it would stop the damp evening air from making her shiver. He knew only too well how sick a person could become if they were exposed to the elements when they were wet. The buggy had a slight canopy, but it only extended a short distance above their heads. The rain was now pelting down at a slant, which was unfortunate. "Thank you, Lance. You are so kind to me," Bessie said as she wrapped the rug around her knees. "I would do that for anyone, but thank you," Lance said. He realized his words may have sounded blunt, but he was just incredibly tired. The rancher didn't feel like conversation while he was concentrating on the muddy track on the way to Bessie's quaint cottage, and the horse was still skittish after the thunderstorm. Bessie was quiet. That wasn't quite the response that she had hoped for from Lance. "I guess Ma taught me well," Lance added, to soften his earlier comment. "Lance, may I confide in you on a matter that is troubling me?" Bessie asked. Lance considered that he didn't have much of a choice, squashed as they were in the buggy together. Their shoulders occasionally touched as the buggy rocked sideways on the sloping track as they headed downhill towards Bessie's home. "Sure," he said in a matter-of-fact manner. "I hesitated whether I should address this matter directly with you," Bessie began. Lance frowned. She surely wasn't about to tender her notice. Bessie was a fine housekeeper, and she and Clara had become firm friends over the past year. "Clara advised me that you are to wed Lizzy next month. At first, I wasn't going to say anything, but I have to, for the sake of your marriage and you personally." Lance really didn't feel like bad news. "Don't let it be about Lizzy, please," he mused. "Lance, the thing is, Lizzy already has a child born out of wedlock. I fear that she may just be marrying you for your money," Bessie concluded. Lance absorbed the information, his heart heavy with dismay. It was possible, but how could Mary have neglected such an important detail? "We shall speak of this matter no more." "Thank you, Bessie," Lance said. Bessie smiled in the darkness as Lance contemplated what to do next. Chapter 13. The worst of the storm was over. Clara decided to make a stew for her brother's return. She asked Lizzy if she would mind making a hot dessert. Lizzy gladly obliged. She was content to be useful, unaccustomed as she was to spend an entire day on relaxation. Lizzy considered how wonderful it was to have their own lemon tree. She squeezed the cut-up lemon into the batter, whisked it briefly, and then set the mixture in the basin that Clara had provided. They even had fresh cream to go with it, which had been a rarity in New York. Clara took the dessert basin from Lizzy. "I am looking forward to this," she remarked. Clara placed a lid on the basin and then placed it on the hearth. She had been surprised at Lizzy's industry in the kitchen. Clara reflected that despite her slight stature, Lizzy's movements were purposeful and organized. Exactly the qualities that would complement her brother's life on the ranch. As the evening had proven, an unexpected turn of events required the ability to adapt. Strong determination was needed to succeed as a rancher. Clara remembered how her mother had stood by her father, helping him when she could and placing no demands on him when she knew he was exhausted. They had enjoyed a strong marriage built on a foundation of love and respect. The women heard the sound of a horse whinny when Lance returned home. He still had to put the horse in the barn. He would be a good 15 minutes longer by Clara's calculation before he joined them for dinner. Clara glanced at Lizzy as she chopped the fruit. Lizzy had promised a fruit crumble for tomorrow's dinner, steamed with oatmeal biscuits. It was a delicious, nutritious dessert for a cool evening. "I shall finish up, Lizzy," Clara said to Lizzy's surprise. Lizzy had been so engrossed in her task that she had quite forgotten Clara. "You go greet Lance and take his coat when he comes in the house," Clara suggested. "He must be soaked," Lizzy replied as she took off her apron. "Offer him a glass of port while you are at it," Clara agreed. Lizzy couldn't deny feeling happy at the prospect of greeting Lance, especially after he had been in Bessie's company. Clara suppressed a smile as she noticed Lizzy glance at her reflection in the small mirror in the crockery cupboard. "Perhaps change into another dress for dinner?" Clara called. Lizzy's dress, while pretty, was not appropriate in this inclement weather. Lizzy returned, relieved but shy at sharing her dilemma. "Clara, may I wash my dresses tomorrow if the sun's out? I don't have another dress to change into." Clara was astonished. She had enough dresses for several outfit changes. Just leave your dresses in the scullery, Clara said kindly. Bessie can wash them in the morning, weather permitting. The women laughed as the rain came down in a torrential downpour. If you are chilly, please wear my jacket, Clara offered, slipping out of it and handing it to Lizzy without waiting for an answer. Thank you, Lizzy said thankfully. She had been feeling the cold, but was too shy to admit it. Lizzy was surprised that the jacket fit her perfectly. While Clara was the same height, she had a fuller figure. Please keep it, Clara said. I have hardly worn it, and it suits you better. They heard the sound of the front door being opened. Lizzy walked briskly towards Lance. Her face showed her delight at his return. Welcome back, Lance. May I take your coat? I can do it myself, he said curtly. His eyes were cold as she looked at him, confused at the contrast in his behavior from earlier. Was she mistaken? Clara said you may like a glass of port, Lizzy suggested. He grimaced. Don't put yourself out for me, he retorted. In percent. Annoyed at his rudeness, Lizzy replied, I shan't offer to help you again. Lance was torn between admiration and fury. Suit yourself, he commented bluntly. Is dinner ready? Even to his own ears, his reply sounded objectionable. The rancher hesitated as he saw hurt reflected in Lizzy's eyes. Why don't you ask your sister? Lizzy said, her voice cool as she regained her composure. Lance strode away, furious at himself for the situation he found himself in. He should have researched her history. He had been foolish to trust Mary Micklethwaite's word. The rancher had assumed Lizzy's character was beyond reproach. Clara was startled to see her brother in such a temper. She was also annoyed that he had been so discourteous towards their guest. How must Lizzy feel? I heard that exchange, Lance. You owe Lizzy an apology. She helped me prepare dinner, and she has been delightful company. Lance ignored the prickle of conscience that told him his sister was correct. He would not be bamboozled by a woman who was clearly just after his money. He remained tight-lipped. Lance, I may be your younger sister, but I will not see you treat a woman with such disrespect. Lance had the grace to look shamefaced. Please forgive my behavior, Clara. Bessie told me that Lizzy has had a child out of wedlock. I am understandably deplored by this information, he added. Clara's intuition told her that Lizzy had not borne a child. Lizzy gave no indication of being manipulative, nor did she project the tiredness associated with being a mother. I doubt that is true, Lance, Clara said as she took stock of the situation. We shall eat dinner together. Then I suggest you ask Lizzy directly in the morning. I have to be on the range at sunrise, Lance said grimly. The sooner this situation is sorted, the better. Perhaps you could get to the root of the matter. His sister looked at him sharply. We were raised to be charitable people. You should not be forming such strong judgments based on hearsay from another person. We shall see, Lance said. Let's eat dinner. Clara took off her apron. The stew should be well tender by now, she remarked, just like the emotions around here. Lance made no conversation aside from thanking them for the meal. Lizzy was bewildered. She recalled how they had enjoyed each other's conversation earlier that day. Now he couldn't bear to be in her company. It was most peculiar. Lizzy could only think that he had a change of heart over their marriage. But why? As she prepared for bed, Lizzy hoped Lance would be more agreeable in the morning. Perhaps she was making too much of his abruptness, but she hadn't imagined it. Lizzy slept fitfully. Chapter 14. Lance wasn't at breakfast. Lance rode out early this morning, Clara told Lizzy in answer to her unasked question hanging in the air between them. Lizzy nodded as if summoning the courage to speak frankly. Clara noticed Lizzy's pensive gaze towards the pasture. Lizzy, is there something you would like to tell me? Clara asked. Yes, thank you, Lizzy said. She prayed Clara could provide a plausible explanation. I don't understand why your brother is being so standoffish. After all, he bought me, Lizzy said. Her words came out in a rush as her pent-up emotions were released. He did what? Clara asked. She frowned. It was her turn to be confused. He paid Mary for me, Lizzy explained. I am a mail-order bride. Yes, but that was per arrangement with you and your half-sister, Clara said. Arranging a mail-order bride is perfectly above board. While polite, she looked defiant as she sprung to her brother's defense. Lizzy shook her head vehemently. I knew nothing of the arrangement. I wasn't looking for a husband. Mary only informed me on the day before my departure from New York. Clara's hand flew to her mouth in dismay. Oh, Lizzy, I am so sorry. I can assure you that Lance thought you were in full agreement with being a mail-order bride. Mary told Lance you were a shy woman, Clara continued. She was assisting in finding a husband worthy of you. Mary told Lance that you didn't have much opportunity to mingle with prospective suitors. Ain't that the truth? Lizzy thought glumly. At first, Lance had reservations about not corresponding with you directly, Clara continued. After the Micklethwaite's visit, he learned more about your character and was given your photograph. Lance made peace with the arrangement. Could you speak to Lance? Tell him I had no choice in the matter, Lizzy asked. She felt her anxiety returning as she wondered at the rancher's treatment. Of course, Clara said. Lance would never marry under false pretenses, and certainly never against your wishes. When Lance returned, he found his home strangely silent. Bessie was nowhere to be seen. Neither were Clara or Lizzy. Lance regretted his rudeness. The fresh air and hours of rounding up cattle had cleared his head. He wanted to apologize to Lizzy, but his pride prevented him. Besides, if Lizzy had unscrupulous plans for getting her hands on a share of his estate, it was she who owed him an apology. His parents had made it their life's work to establish a profitable ranch. Their early years of ranching had been an uphill battle, yet they had persevered. Lance couldn't risk letting their legacy be taken over by a calculating woman. A picture of Lizzy sprung into his head. Calculating was too strong a description, he conceded. But if what Bessie had told him about Lizzy was true, he would not be marrying her. The sooner he got to the heart of the matter, the better for everybody. Bessie appeared carrying a bundle of dry washing in the laundry basket. Relieved to see her, Lance inquired as to his sister and Lizzy's whereabouts. Robert took them to Rosewood Town to stock up on our annual provisions. Bessie blushed as Lance raised his eyebrows. Your provisions, she added. They have been out the whole morning? Lance inquired. It was unlike Clara to take so long buying necessities. Yes, sir, Bessie said. They should be back soon. Clara mentioned wanting to talk to you before you return to the range, Bessie explained. Thanks. I had better wait until their return, Lance said. That will be all, Bessie. Thank you. It irked Bessie to hear her employer address her so dismissively. She was friends with his sister, for goodness sake. Yes, he was her employer, but they were close in age. He was unwed and eligible. Bessie gave no hint of her disappointment as she returned to her chores. If she was to win Lance over, he would need to think he had chosen her, not the other way around. Bessie was running out of ideas to sabotage his marriage to Lizzy. Time was marching on. She had to come up with a plan soon. When Clara and Lizzy eventually returned, Lance scarcely had time to indulge in conversation. But Clara told him enough to relieve his fears about Lizzy being a potential gold digger. He thanked his sister for clarifying the matter. Clara was not accustomed to her brother holding his cards so close to his chest. Given the circumstances, perhaps he just needed to absorb what she had told him and decide what to do next. Before he returned to herding steer, Lance called Lizzy aside for a private conversation on the porch. Lizzy, please accept my apologies for being so curt yesterday, Lance said. Apology accepted. Thank you, Lizzy accepted. Clara told me that you were unaware of the mail-order bride arrangement. I think it best then that you return to New York immediately. We shall pay for your return ticket and make all the necessary arrangements, Lance said. Lizzy found the rancher's businesslike manner as hurtful as his off-handed manner the previous day. She didn't trust herself to speak for fear of crying. Lizzy, Lance added. I cannot return to New York, Lizzy replied. The Micklethwaites will not have me. Mary made it quite clear that we were parting ways after the arrangement. Lizzy's eyes met Lance's. His eyes were troubled as he contemplated the next course of action. If he was honest, he was largely to blame for this dilemma. He should have insisted on writing to Lizzy directly. Lance took a deep breath. Clara suggested that you stay with us a while longer. We can decide what to do after a week or two. The pressure will be off with the roundup then. Is that all I am? Lizzy mused. Am I just to be fitted into his routine when he can find the time? Why did he want a wife in the first place? She had done nothing wrong. Lizzy forced herself to hold her emotions at bay. "Thanks for obliging my request to remain," Lizzy said. Lance put on his hat and tilted it politely. He really had to get going. "We shall have to see about that," Lance said curtly. "Good afternoon." As he rode off, Lizzy reminded herself that Lance had shown mercy in seeing how they could reach a solution. Lizzy wondered if she should have told Lance she would like to marry him if he still wanted her. On second thought, that sounded rather pitiful. Lizzy was glad she hadn't conveyed that message. As he rode away, Lance realized he was conflicted. On the one hand, he wanted Lizzy to stay. On the other hand, he wanted her to leave as soon as possible. That way, he could forget about her and get on with his life as it was before. When his biggest challenges involved the seasons, livestock, and getting the best prices at auctions, perhaps it would be better for all concerned if they parted ways. "Before you even gave her a chance, Cromwell?" A voice popped in his head. Now he was imagining things. He could have sworn that voice belonged to his father. Cromwell Sr. had been a stern but loving father. That voice of reason, or whatever it was worth heeding. The rancher heard cowboys holler in the distance. Lance decided to concentrate on rounding up herds of cattle. That was just the medicine he needed to restore his equilibrium on this warm August day. Tiring as it was. Clara and Lizzy hadn't spent the whole morning stocking up on provisions. Clara had managed to persuade Robert to take them to a neighboring ranch. In plus, they had met Betty, a local seamstress who was renowned for making fine dresses. Clara provided Betty with enough lace to make a suitable bodice for a dress for Lizzy to wear to her wedding. Betty had taken Lizzy's measurements after first treating them to tea and biscuits. They would meet again in a week to let her know if the wedding was going ahead and if so, place the order for the dress. The outing had cheered Lizzy up considerably. Neither Lizzy nor Clara felt any disloyalty towards Lance. They were making sure everything went smoothly if Lance decided to go ahead with his marriage to Lizzy. "Some things are better left to women," Clara observed. "Wedding arrangements are one of them." The women smiled in agreement. When Lance returned well after sunset, he was relieved to be able to get out of the saddle at last. Getting married was the furthest thing from his mind. The last section of the cattle trail had been treacherous. The usually slow-moving river on the last stretch of land was flowing fast. The gushing water had broken the surrounding banks, making deep furrows where the solid ground had been days before. The point at which the cowboys usually crossed the river was impassable. There was no other way to get home, other than across. Fortunately, a cowboy who went by the name of Jeff, who exhibited exceptional horsemanship and more than average mechanical ability, created a pulley system for the horsemen. Jeff explained his idea to the doubtful crew. "If a sudden current of water sweeps any of us off our horse, we can hold on to the pulley for dear life." Fortunately for riders and horses, Jeff's mechanism wasn't put to the test in that sense. After the first horse crossed, it was easier to persuade the other horses to follow suit. They still needed coaxing and sweet-talking before they obliged, though. The water reached the horses' flanks, which meant that the riders' legs got wet. Not the greatest ride, Lance grunted as he felt his trousers cling to him like wet tentacles. Lance instructed the cowboys to give their horses a short rest after they reached the other side, to calm them down. The cowboys appreciated the opportunity to dry off. Lance called an early lunch just before noon to recover from the challenging river crossing. With the work done, Lance allowed everyone 10 minutes to rest in a dry clearing on higher ground beyond the river. Lance ate with the cowboys. Beans and cornbread mostly, eaten straight out of the saddlebags to save time dismounting. Thankfully, everyone had managed to keep their food dry by using the pulley system. Jeff was declared the all-around hero of the day. Food is a cowboy's fuel. Someone even gave him an extra corn cake, which is high praise from a cowboy. The last of the steers had been herded into an enclosure on the upper boundary of Lance's ranch, so there was no risk of losing ground to the cattle. Now, as Lance led his mount to the barn, the reality of recent days returned to bother him. He could see Clara and Lizzy sitting together on a blanket under the oak tree, catching welcome sunshine after the showers. If the situation were different, he may have joined them. Instead, He walked in the opposite direction to join the ranch hands who were feeding the horses as they settled in their stalls in the barn. "We did well today, men, thank you. Despite the weather and that darn river crossing, we finished early." They grinned and then replied as one with a cheery, "Thanks, boss." Back at the ranch later, Bessie managed to catch a moment with Clara. She had finished preparing carrots and green beans for her employer's dinner. "Is the wedding still set for September?" Bessie asked. Clara looked at her friend sharply. "Why would you think otherwise?" she replied. Bessie hesitated. "I just thought Lance seemed out of sorts lately. I didn't mean to pry." Clara relaxed. She decided it was safe to confide in her friend. After all, she had never had reason to doubt Bessie. "Lance had some concerns that he needed to clear up," Clara said. "Thankfully, they have been resolved. But yes, I agree. Lance does not seem himself these last few days. Please treat this as confidential," Clara cautioned. "Lance should make a final decision concerning the wedding in a week or so. I am trusting that it goes ahead as planned." "Lance is just nervous. Marriage is a big step," Bessie commented. "You are probably right," Clara laughed. Clara prayed that Lance and Lizzy would set a wedding date well before the week was out. She kept this to herself. Bessie was taking an undue interest in her employer's marriage. Lance wouldn't approve of his sister speaking too freely of his private life to an employee. Lizzy also needed to be accorded this respect. Bessie was rather forward in this matter, Clara mused. Chapter 15. Lance joined Clara and Lizzy for breakfast the next morning. Clara noticed Lance paid scant attention to Lizzy. She was getting tired of her brother's reticence to speak to his future wife. Clara had a good mind to tell him that, even if it wasn't her place to do so. However, there was no need to test her brother's limits of patience towards her. Lizzy surprised Clara with her forthrightness. "Lance, now that the roundup is complete, I wondered if I may put a request to you," Lizzy asked. "Sure, go ahead," Lance replied. He put down his coffee mug as he contemplated what Lizzy's request was likely to be. Perhaps she was going to ask for a return ticket to New York. He could hardly blame her. "Thank you," she said politely. "I was delighted the other day when you suggested teaching me how to ride a horse. Does your offer still stand?" That was the last thing he had expected to be asked by the oh-so-pretty woman sitting opposite him. "Of course. When would you like your first lesson?" Lizzy glanced out the window. The blue sky beckoned, and there was scarcely a breeze. "How about today, if that suits you?" she suggested. "Meet you at the barn in an hour," Lance said. His decision surprised his sister. Clara knew how loath he was usually to take a morning off from ranching. "Clara, could you loan Lizzy a riding habit?" Lance asked. Lizzy clapped her hands in excitement as Clara nodded with a smile. Lance finished his breakfast in silence as he considered who to delegate mucking out the stables to, since his plans had altered. The horse riding lesson surprised Lance. "You are too quick to judge people," he scolded himself. Not only was Lizzy a quick and able student, but she also respected his expertise as a horseman. Contrary to some people he had taught, Lizzy showed no hesitation in following his instructions. The horse had picked up that the novice rider was relaxed, which made Lizzy's lesson easier. Riding a horse side saddle made it much more difficult to control a horse or to ride at a trot. Lizzy managed both during her very first lesson. Remarkable, Lance reflected. While Lance had chosen the gentlest mare for Lizzy to ride, horses could be tricky creatures at the best of times. Yet Lizzy had been so calm that she had the mare at her beck and call. Lance had been astonished. He privately thought that Lizzy had the makings of a good rider, good enough to ride out with the cowboys. He promised her another lesson on Saturday. He had been that impressed with her progress. When the lesson ended, Lance told Lizzy they could enjoy a picnic later. He would fetch her from the house around tea time. Lizzy could scarcely believe the turnaround in Lance's behavior towards her. Lizzy almost skipped into the house afterward. She had enjoyed the lesson far more than she had anticipated. It had been such fun learning how to hold the reins and then conveying instructions to the horse, also learning what not to do. Clara didn't need to ask how the lesson had been. Lizzy's face told a story. Bessie eavesdropped in stony silence as Lizzy shared how Daisy had let her trot around the corral without Lance's guiding hand. Lizzy decided to make a peach cobbler for tea. First, she needed to change out of her riding habit. The cinched-in waist was stiflingly tight. She had been so engrossed in her lesson that she had forgotten that she could scarcely breathe. The outfit was most impractical. Lance had told her about a woman by the name of Annie Oakley, who was quite famous in the West. Annie rode side saddle, yet she managed to do stunts and competed at rodeo level. Some of her stunts included circling the entire saddle and shooting. She was always spot on target. It was quite astonishing. Later, as the sun slowly sunk towards the horizon, Lizzy considered that it had been one of her happiest days ever. Lance had taken her in the cart to the pond about 2 miles beyond the house. Lizzy thought she saw a glimpse of Bessie at a cottage, but perhaps she was mistaken. Bessie hid in the stables after completing her duties. She vowed to stop Lance and Lizzy's wedding and any chance of their happiness. She would set her plan in motion after nightfall. Chapter 16. Lance heard the evidence of fire before he saw the flames. Loud crackling sounds as timber collapsed and flames leaped on their fiery path, destroying everything in their path. He filled his lungs with air and then yelled, "Clara! Lizzy!" Clara had the foresight to douse her head with using from her nightstand pitcher and did the same for her brother. Lance grabbed her arm and escorted her out of the house in a dash for safety. Several times he pushed her aside to avoid a falling beam or a flame from harming them. Worried for her brother, Clara offered to go back inside to help him rescue Lizzy. There was no sign of her. A few ranch hands had gathered in a shocked group in front of the house, some holding young children. Lance returned with Robert, who appeared dazed but unhurt. Clara noticed Lance's arm bleeding. "Lance," she shouted, "be safe in there." He was gone so long that she feared he had perished. Finally, he emerged with Lizzy in his arms. She was unconscious but breathing. The fire was on the brink of engulfing Lizzy's room, but she was spared. "Thanks be to God," Clara declared. Lance cradled Lizzy in his arms. "Lizzy," he pleaded, "please stay with us, with me. Please marry me." Lizzy opened her eyes. There was recognition in her eyes, but she was too weak to respond. "I love you," Lance said fiercely as he held her close in his arms. Lizzy had never felt so odd in all her life. Dizzy and scared, then awake and overjoyed. When she heard Lance say he loved her, she knew everything would be all right. With everybody safely out of the house, a neighbor took Lance, Lizzy, and Clara to the local inn in his cart. The innkeeper shook his head as he heard about the disheveled family's plight. What a loss, such a beautiful homestead. Lance was too tired to respond. Clara took charge. "Please, could we have 2 rooms for the night? I will share with Lizzy. Lance will have his own room." The innkeeper obliged and provided a substantial discount. When Lance woke up the next day, he splashed his face with cold water. Other than a gash on his arm, he counted himself lucky to be alive. But now that he had decided to marry Lizzy, how was he going to provide for her and his sister? Take it one step at a time. There was that stern, loving voice again. He laughed. How Lance could laugh considering the circumstances was beyond his comprehension, but he laughed all the same. The minister waived his usual marriage fee for Lance and Lizzy. Lizzy wore an ivory lace dress, the skirt the remnant of the dress that Lance's mother had worn on her wedding day. She carried an orange posy and wore a garland of flowers in her hair. Lance thought Lizzy the most beautiful creature he had ever seen, and she was his wife. They promised to honor and cherish each other all their days together. As the wedding ceremony ended and they were showered with rose petals, a man stepped forward. He looked pleasant and was dressed in a suit and tie. "Forgive my surprise introduction. May I have a word with you both privately prior to the festivities?" "You sure can," Lance said after planting a kiss on his wife's upturned mouth. "My name is Andrew Harris. I am a lawyer from New York. I was appointed by Lizzy's parents to ensure that she got her share of the inheritance when she turned 21. Lance and Lizzy exchanged glances, startled by his disclosure. "When I visited Mary Micklewhite and discovered that Lizzy's cash inheritance was depleted, Mary confessed that she had sold you, Lizzy, for a substantial sum of money." Lizzy gasped at this information. "We reached an agreement that no more would be said on condition that she hand over the remaining money," Andrew explained. He handed Lizzy a velvet bag. Lance smiled at his wife's good fortune while Lizzy squeezed his hand. "I have more good news, Mr. and Mrs. Cromwell," the lawyer added. Lance and Lizzy stared at him, stunned. "Unbeknown to you, Lizzy, your parents set up an investment fund when you were a year old. 20 years later, it has grown into a substantial sum, almost $2,000. "That is enough to rebuild your ranch," Lizzy whispered, overcome by their good fortune. "Our ranch, Lizzy," Lance corrected her. Epilogue. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the prairie as Lizzy and Lance stood hand in hand before their newly completed ranch house. The structure rose from the ground like a promise fulfilled: sturdy timber walls, a wraparound porch, and windows that caught the golden light. Clara stood alongside them, her weathered hands clasped together as she gazed upon what 9 months of labor had wrought. "Hard to believe it's finally finished," Lance murmured, his calloused thumb tracing circles over Lizzy's knuckles. The scent of fresh-cut pine still lingered in the air, mingling with the sweet aroma of prairie grass swaying in the gentle breeze. Lizzy's eyes swept over every detail: the carved railings Lance had insisted on crafting by hand, the flower boxes already fitted beneath each window, the solid oak door that would welcome them home each evening. 9 months of watching walls rise board by board, of camping under canvas while their dream took shape, of hoping and planning for this very moment. "This is to be our home forever, Lizzy," Lance said, his voice thick with emotion. His heart swelled with an indescribable joy as he imagined the years stretching ahead of them: quiet mornings on the porch, evenings by the hearth, seasons changing beyond these windows they would call their own. Lizzy turned to catch Clara's eye, finding the older woman watching her with that knowing smile she'd come to treasure. Clara gave an almost imperceptible nod, her eyes twinkling with encouragement. The gesture was small, but it steadied Lizzy's racing heart. Now, this was the moment she'd been waiting for: their new home complete, their future spread before them like the endless sky above. "Lance, I have something to say," Lizzy began, her voice carrying a tremor she couldn't quite suppress. Her free hand instinctively moved to rest against her still flat belly, where their secret had been growing as surely as the walls of their house had risen. Lance turned to face her fully, his brow creasing with gentle concern at the tension in her voice. "What is it, Lizzy?" She shifted from foot to foot, suddenly feeling as nervous as a schoolgirl. The words she'd rehearsed a dozen times seemed to tangle on her tongue. Around them, the prairie wind whispered through the grass, and somewhere in the distance, cattle lowed softly. Clara stepped closer, her presence a comfort. "I am with child," Lizzy finally whispered, the words carrying on the evening breeze like a prayer. For a heartbeat, Lance stood frozen, his eyes searching her face as if to confirm he'd heard correctly. Then joy broke across his features like sunrise over the mountains. With a whoop of delight, he swept Lizzy up in his arms, spinning her around as her laughter rang out across the open land. When he set her down, his hands came up to cup her face with infinite tenderness. "You could not make me happier if you tried," he breathed before capturing her lips in a kiss that tasted of promises and forever. Clara wiped at her eyes with the corner of her apron, her own heart full as she watched these 2 young people she'd come to love like her own children. Their ranch house stood ready to shelter not just 2 hearts, but 3, and perhaps more in the years to come. The sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. As Lance and Lizzy held each other close, their new home waiting behind them and their growing family nestled safely between them, the vast Texas territory seemed to hum with possibility. Here, where the red earth met the endless sky, they would build more than just a life together. They would build a legacy. "Welcome home," Lance whispered against Lizzy's hair, and in that moment, surrounded by endless possibility and infinite love, home had never felt more perfect.